Thank you, Chair Colby. You are now live.
Great. Okay.
We're just going to send an email to our attendees to let them know that we're back on.
Okay, and could you make me a co-host when you have a chance?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, I see the attendees are piling in here.
Okay, we had 10 when we went to closed session.
Okay. Let's let them all get in here. 15. Okay. 15, okay. All right. Looks good. Okay. So thank you to our general counsel. Do we have anything to report from closed session? I don't think so.
There's nothing to report. Thank you.
No final actions. Okay. Great. Thank you very much. And now I believe we have we already did our roll call, and now we have kind of general public comment on items that might be of interest to EBCE, but are not specifically on tonight's agenda. And Madam Clerk, you want to call? I see one person raising their hand.
Let's see. Okay, so I do have 2 speakers
Great.
For public comment. I have Alita Dupree and Blair Beekman.
Excellent.
Thank you. I'm just looking for their microphone. Okay, Alita, can you please raise your hand so I can unmute you?
I see Blair is right here.
Mm-hmm.
We could do that one first.
Yes.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Blair, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Let me get my speech prepared here. I have to nimble around my mobile phone here. Okay, here we go. As part of the deal made with PG&E in this past month, it was meant to calm future volatility fears. It is tempting to want to look for ways to now continuously calm what has been a volatile energy trading market for decades. In light of the recent deal with PG&E and a new world economy we're possibly about to enter, I hope you can continue to try to navigate the ideas of volatility in the energy sharing marketplace, as it has been a shared procedure for quite some time now. Although stressful, I have been assuming use of energy trading volatility can be how to introduce incredibly good, more positive, sustainable energy project models and infrastructure building in the next few years. We would all rather work with stability instead of volatility. I just worry to put more efforts in towards the term stability in the next few years will allow the nuclear power industry and the smart technology industry a much stronger foothold than they need or deserve. These groups have proven, as the fossil fuel industry in the past, their good intentions are often seriously mixed with detrimental thinking, ideas, and plans. COVID-19 and this recent deal with PG&E should be a wake-up call for all of us. By the allocation process next year, there can be clear understandings for all of us that to want to practice our good, positive, sustainable energy ideals and its infrastructure. As this is how we can be sure of a good map and a good path towards a shared future in healing terms, and offer the better ideals of local community energy and the years of good practices East Bay Local Community Energy has offered the SF Bay Area and the Earth. To close, I'm on the side to always keep ideas of inflation down. For energy trading to work as a deflationary tool in the next year could set a good standard and decency that would naturally bring relief and respect, even as I can understand the raising of prices can have its place. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And we had one more speaker, Madam Clerk.
Sorry, I'm on mute, but Alita Dupree, you are unmuted.
All right. Thank you, Chair Cal members. Alita Dupree for the record. Let the records reflect. My pronouns are she and her. So it's good to be at this meeting, and I'm looking forward to it. East Bay Community Energy is very important to me when I come to Oakland. As I recall, when I arrived in Oakland on May 31st of 2018, checked into my hotel late at night. I woke up on June 1, and I knew that even though everything looked the same, that I was part of something bigger than myself, that East Bay Community Energy had gone live. And so this work that we continue is very important to me because public power allows me to participate And I've been involved in public power on and off all of my life. I think the first time I used public power was as a teenager, and I took my first ride on the New York City subway, and it is powered by the Power Authority, which is a public power agency. So it has gone from there of me staying and living in various cities. I would like to see us as we go forward to add more renewables and to continue the work with the value proposition. Because I want to always ensure that at least in our class that our rates are less than PG, because there will always be a subset of people that will say, why did I pay more for the same thing somewhere else? So we always want to maintain that edge. And so I'm seeing opportunities out there. How can we buy more renewables, and how can we take advantage of the power prices that I see on the Cal ISO? Of course, that's much easier said than done, because there are things like grid constraints, and we want to be beholden to the spot market, because that can swing in all different kinds of ways. But as I close, I think it's important to emphasize awareness of East Bay community energy. You know, I'm never going to have closure when I stay at my weekly room, because I don't know if the place that I stay at joined East Bay Community Energy, or if they chose to remain with PG&E. And so I may never know that, because that's typically done on a corporate level. So let's continue the awareness, so that way we can continue to build this community that is East Bay Community Energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Whoops. I believe those are all our speakers. So we're going to move to the next agenda item, Madam Clerk, and that will be our consent calendar. Colleagues, does anybody have any items that they want to pull off the consent calendar before we vote on it?
I have one that I've been requested by a CAC member to pull from the consent calendar. Item 8, amendment to the sponsorship policy.
Okay, let's pull that. Item 8, and do we have a motion on the consent calendars of items 6, 7, and 9?
So moved.
Second.
And let's see, who were those people?
Mendel moved.
Mendel and Arreguin.
Hayward and Berkeley moved and second the rest of the consent calendar. Madam Clerk, are there any speakers on this item?
For this item, I'm sorry, 2 speakers. I have Jessica Tovar and James Havsner.
Is it possible that they're here to speak on the item that was pulled?
They are here to speak on the item that is pulled.
Okay, so that we're not on that item yet.
Okay, perfect.
Appreciate
Sorry
that.
about that.
No, quite all right. So any discussion on the remaining parts of the consent calendar? Seeing none, can we have,
Chair.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Councilmember Pilch, Mayor Pilch from Albany.
Yeah, I noticed that the minutes were sent to us beforehand, but they have not yet appeared on the website. I assume that's just a clerical error. So I have not had a chance to review those yet. I'm happy to vote yes for them, though.
Okay, Madam Clerk, could you clarify the availability of the minutes online?
Sure, just a moment and I can get them posted. Sorry, I have a 6-year-old dancing in front of me. One moment.
Right, we could all dance. All right. Okay. I'm going to wait till these get posted, just to abundance of caution here.
Okay, they are not on the website, but I can get those posted.
Okay. Does anybody have any? So we did receive them, is what you're saying? Yeah, I saw them earlier. I mean, I saw them a while ago.
Yes, so they were sent to the board. They're just not on the webpage.
Okay. I hate to be a stickler. Madam General Counsel, is that a problem, us voting on the minutes if they were not actually posted on the website in advance?
Hold on, getting my video back online. Good evening, Chair and members of the board. We do need to make sure that they are available to the public before we can approve them. Stephanie, by any chance, were they disseminated to the attendees of the meeting? Or could they be?
I'm gonna use my prerogative as a chair, and I'm gonna remove the minutes from the agenda, and we'll just approve those at the next meeting with the minutes today. That's no big deal. It happens all the time.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Are on the website in the agenda packet. They're just not listed individually.
Oh, if that's the case, as long as they are available for the public to view as well, you could approve them tonight or you could defer.
Oh.
Thank you.
My apologies. So they're on the full agenda packet in the entire packet.
Correct. They're just not listed individually.
Okay, then we're fine. Okay, I rescind what I just said. We will vote on the 6, 7, and 9 as a package for the consent calendar. It's been moved and seconded. Madam Clerk, could you call the roll?
Sure. Alameda County,
Yep.
Albany,
Yes.
Berkeley,
Yes.
Dublin,
Yes.
Emeryville,
Aye.
Fremont,
Yes.
Hayward,
Yes.
Livermore,
Yes.
Newark,
Aye.
Piedmont,
Aye.
Pleasanton, San Leandro,
Aye.
Tracy,
Yes.
Union City,
Yes.
Community Advisory Committee.
I don't
I'm
get to
sorry,
vote on
apologize,
these.
Mary. Yes, sorry.
Why
Going down the
not?
list. I'll go back to Pleasanton. I didn't hear if you were going to abstain
yeah.
or yes.
I'm
Okay.
sorry.
That's
Yes.
yes. Thank you. And Oakland.
Aye.
Thank you.
Did you get Emeryville in there?
I did get Emeryville.
Got it. Okay. All right, that's adopted. Now we'll go to item 8 that was pulled from the calendar. Can staff, do you have a extremely brief presentation on item 8? It's in the packet.
We do not have a presentation on the item. I can certainly speak to the item though.
That's what I mean. Could you just speak to it
Yeah.
briefly? Let us know.
Yeah, so the intent here is to align our sponsorship policy with our procurement policy. And our procurement policy, our non-emergency procurement policy was to grant signing authority to the CEO up to $100,000. And we're aligning our sponsorship policy with our general procurement policies.
Okay. We're going to have a couple speakers on this, but colleagues, do you have any questions on this item as you just heard described that is in the packet already? I see Councilmember Ed Hernandez, is that correct?
Yes,
Go
yes,
ahead.
sure. One question, I saw on the matrix that you had the CEO at 100,000, but I think I saw in this packet item that the council would be able to approve anything from $0 to $50,000. Did I see that correctly or no? That's for our CEO.
Yes, let me, I'm just trying to get to the right.
I can note that
Jump in, I'm just pulling
the
it
case
down.
in there, and generally that's consistent with other procurement policy. To the extent we had internal counsel, that is why that was.
Oh, yes, okay.
not intended for external.
And I think the point that this is something you'd asked previously. We have a general policy that all of our we have to have everything approved to form by council.
Okay.
So I think that's the
Great.
reference, that it has to be approved to form by council. All agreements.
And yeah, in the matrix, it seemed like the council had signing authority, and that's how I wasn't quite sure if that's how it was referencing.
You know what? That was referred to when we had an in-house general counsel, because of that was a position that reported to the board, not to me. There was a distinct signing authority for all procurement that was granted, but Inter does not have signing authority in that way. I believe. Inter, please step in.
I think the inclusion of the general counsel in this table may have been just, we were mirroring the table that's in the procurement policy, because that signing authority for the general counsel, which again applied to the in-house general counsel and is not exercised by me, was for outside counsel contracts, not for sponsorship opportunities. So in short, I wouldn't anticipate ever using this signing authority in this table, and would, with Nick's okay, I think we could delete that entry. I don't see the general counsel separately agreeing to sponsor an event.
Yeah, I prefer that we can strike that $50,000 line item there for the council, not to have signing authority. I mean, of course, we want to have it reviewed in form, and then the CEO or those other parties be able to agree to those contracts. I think if we can remove that, then.
Sorry, it does provide in number 3 above that any sponsorship over $5,000 requires general counsel approval of the form. For the smaller agreements, we may just sign off on their form.
Okay. Does that make sense, Chair, to remove that item there from the table 1 from consent item? I think it's 8B or 8.
Okay, anybody have any objection to that clarification? Also, I'll see, let's, I see Mary Sutter.
Hi, I just wanted to kind of bring to everybody's attention why I got this request to have it bring forward to the board. And it is that there is a big jump in terms of what sponsorship had been previously. Anything over 5,000 had to come to the board for approval. And so now it's anything over 100,000 that needs to come to the board. And it was that big jump that caught people's attention within the CAC. And so that's, it was kind of difficult to see in the red line item because it was in the blue. It was kind of in that blue part. It was hard to see. So that was kind of the big difference and why I was requested to have this pulled and discussed. Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't we, Madam Clerk, let's call the public speakers now on this, and then we could talk more if needed.
Okay. Just one moment.
Hi, everyone. This is Jessica.
Jessica, one moment, please. Let me start your timer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, you're ready?
Okay. Jessica Tovar, on behalf of East Bay Clean Power Alliance, we wanted to recommend that, well, just noting that there's a huge jump in the amount of money of sponsorship that staff could make. We were suggesting that perhaps, if not full board, that perhaps the executive committee, that the community advisory committee and executive committee can weigh in on large, I guess, large sponsorships. It just seems like a huge jump of amount of money for sponsorships, and we think that the community and at least some of the board should weigh in on that, on sponsorships of that size. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, I had a more of a procedural question. I wanted to speak on the minutes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, the minute, thank you. The minutes approval was about, included you're wanting to make the deal with PG&E about nuclear and hydroelectric power, the large package deal. And I just wanted ourselves to be aware of that deal and that we have like important responsibilities in making that deal that, you know, I think we'll all be thinking about and considering, you know, not just now, but for the next year and for the next 2 years, and how we can, we need to really reconsider what are more positive, sustainable ideas within ourselves, and what can be more positive, sustainable energy ideas that I think we're all need to, we'll be addressing ourselves in the next year, and I hope we can learn how to openly talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, and I believe those are all our speakers. Back to the board. Any more questions or comments on this proposed policy? Mayor Araguian.
Thank you. I don't have a question about the policy. I do have a question to the CEO around, are we going to be approving $100,000 sponsorships, or even 50,000 sponsorships for that matter, when we are facing some anticipated fiscal challenges this next year? I look at the contributions to the relief funds as separate from sponsorships. So I guess my question is more about, do we anticipate doing large sponsorships of events? Also knowing that large events are probably, in-person events are probably not going to happen for some time.
Nick?
Nick, I'm sorry, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm here now. At this point, it's hard to sort of anticipate, what the event landscape is going to be. You make a good point that, many events are going to be virtual, not in person. And so, the expectation around cost is going to be different. We have sponsored, a number of events historically, and, it's built into the budget. This year, I believe we have a small sponsorship budget that is built into our, say, marketing budget and our local development budget. It's much lower than in past years. But for instance, we have sponsored for at least 1 year, perhaps 2 years, an energy conference at UC Berkeley. Not $100,000, but I think $10,000 sponsorship there. We've sponsored the Green Lining Institute. They have an annual event. We've served as a sponsor there. So, I think your point is well taken that, given the fiscal challenges and just the overall sort of reductions in budget, I wouldn't expect that we would, but there is some sponsorship budget built in. And so I expect that we will be doing some sponsorships. So again, the dollar amount here is really, it's just about alignment between, we have a procurement policy and we're just aligning our sponsorship policy with our services.
I don't object to the policy. It's just the numbers raise the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think as we're discussing the budget, I think this is an area where there is a little bit of discretion. And, if we're looking at, reducing power content or reducing the value proposition, I think things should be on the table for consideration. So I just wanted to raise that issue, particularly in light of the budget discussion today.
Great, thank you. Supervisor Haggerty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a bit uncomfortable with this. I realize we're aligning it with other policies, but Nick, I believe you're the only one that should be approving sponsorships. I don't like the fact that we're giving the authority to other senior members. I realize they're senior members, but quite frankly, the buck stops with you. And I think that if we were going to do $100,000 sponsorship, that, there should be some mechanism. I think anything over 25,000, there should be some mechanism to check in with board members, whether it's just through the executive committee, if it's through the marketing committee. I really don't care, but I really don't think that somebody's going to come to you tomorrow and say, I need $100,000 and I need it by next week. I don't sense that same urgency is going to happen. That maybe if we had a catastrophe and you had to come up with $100,000 real quick to solve that catastrophe to our, whether or not we're procuring energy or not. So I really am uncomfortable with the table as it's outlined. I'm not uncomfortable with the idea that you're bringing a policy forward and want to get something done. I just think it's far too much latitude in far too many different areas.
Thank you. Nick, did you have I just wanted to clarify for those listening and for the board members who may not remember what they read. The chart we're talking about is table 1 on the attachment for this item 8. And so if I'm reading it correctly, the chair, sorry, the chief executive officer, Nick, would have the authority up to $100,000. Below that, the chief operating officer would have the authority up to $25,000, and other senior staff would have authority up to $10,000 or $5,000, depending on who they are. Nick, is that correct? We're taking out the general counsel, I think, on this.
Correct. Yes, we will strike general counsel from this, and right, it's so Howard would be able to approve a sponsorship up to 25, and then everyone else would be limited to $5,000 to $10,000, and then there's some cases where it's $5,000.
Got it. Okay, so that's so for clarity purposes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Scott.
I didn't say anything about the general counsel because I was listening and I heard that discussion. I'm uncomfortable with having other members within the organization, other than Nick, who works directly for us, having the authority to, do sponsorships. I think it needs to be Nick's sole authority.
Okay. Is there, I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on this. Is there a dollar amount that you would be comfortable having people, a senior staff person other than Nick signing off?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
0.
Okay, so I like any other thoughts about that to the other board members? Looking for hands raised or waving or what have you. I'm not seeing any other thoughts here. Oh, now I am. Okay, Mayor Erigin and then Councilmember Ed Hernandez.
I wanted to address a different issue that Supervisor Haggerty had raised around if there's a sponsorship above a certain threshold, whether it's 10,000, 25,000, those things aren't going to the board. If they're going to be done administratively, that there should be at least some check-in or notification of the executive committee. Just once again, following up on the comments I made with regard to the budgetary challenges that we're anticipating the next fiscal year. So I just wanted to also raise that issue for consideration.
Okay, thank you. Director Ed Hernandez.
Thank you, Chair. In regards to past sponsorships, I know we've done the Alameda County Fairgrounds and in partnership with that. What other large partnerships or sponsorships have we done that drive the policy that I think you want to mirror to procurement? I'm hearing.
So most of our I would say historically our sponsorships have been predominantly an extension of our marketing and outreach. So, we will sponsor. We sponsor the Oakland Roots minor league soccer team. We sponsored. I think we sponsored like the Hayward local municipal band. These are Solano Stroll. We're doing a lot. The reality is, vast majority of these are very small. The Oakland Marathon was one that was a fairly large ticket item because like the county fair, these are sort of our big opportunities to create customer brand awareness. The Bill Pickett Rodeo. These are all just events. Midnight basketball. I could go down the list. We have many. Again, most of them are very small, and they're all governed by a very defined budget that we set every year for marketing sponsorships. And there's while I don't have a sort of formal signature, I'm not asking for the formal signature of everyone. I am involved and aware of, at some level, every sponsorship that we do. And I think the reason why we're going for this delegation is an efficiency. You could imagine that, again, pre-COVID, we might have 25, 30 sponsorships that we're executing, going into, say, the summer months. The summer and the fall in particular, if you think about all of the city events that you have the San Leandro Suds Festival, the Zucchini Festival, I could go on and on, right? There are the Livermore Little League. I mean, these are all the events that we're sponsoring. The vast majority are small dollar sponsorships, but again, there are certain large events like the marathon, like the county fair, that are fairly large ticket. And I think our parameter is, as long as they fit in a budget that's been approved by the board, it's our job to go and sort of execute.
And to make my comment on this, I think if we dropped Nick's authority up to 50,000, bringing everything down a notch, maybe it's more fiscally conservative, and anything over 50 comes to the board. But overall, I mean, I think it would just sort of squeeze it down a little bit, give us more fiscal responsibility at the board level, anything over 50, but optimize efficiency when we get back to normal. But right now, I think there's a lot of scrutiny of what we're doing and what we're not doing, and I think this is something for the future. And I understand.
If you want to make that a motion, I'll second it, Ed.
All right, so we'll still make it a motion. We are removing that to council. I see other hands raised just for my own purview. But yeah, if we move it down, Nick, to 50,000, anything over 50 comes to the board. And then keeping the chief operating officer from 0.25, senior director, vice president 0.10, director 0.5, but the buck still stops with Nick.
Well,
we're all aware of that.
Absolutely. And so I'll just sort of then say, if folks have recommendations for sponsorships, which we often get from our city members, let's just, recognize that our turnaround time might be limited by the fact that we might have to bring things to the board. So, I think that the vast majority of our sponsorships are coming from city staff who are coming to us saying, we're doing an event in our city, will EBC sponsor? These are not discretionary. This is not us going out there seeking sponsorships by and large. These are well-established events. So again, I don't have a problem with the 50,000 or 100,000. It really was, we have a procurement policy. We just wanted to align the procurement policy. Now we're going to have two slightly different policies. Not a big deal.
Thank you, Director Pilch.
Thanks. That sounds, the motion sounds good to me, but my only request, my biggest concern is public reporting. So if it's not already in the policy, I'm not sure if it is. I think that the sponsorship should be reported to the public, either to the whole board or the executive board or the marketing committee. I don't really care, but it should be publicly reported. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I believe that they get reported at the subsequent board meeting in your executive director report. Is that right?
That's right.
If that language.
I mean, we have reporting requirements already, so we're not modifying our reporting requirements here.
So they already get reported to the board.
It's item 7 today.
Yeah. Okay, Director Patino.
Yeah, I'm also in favor of Councilman Hernandez's motion. I also had some concerns like Supervisor Haggerty, but I just want to make sure that it's very clear, like Councilman Hernandez said, was that the buck does stop with Nick. Even if a director has discretion, these sponsorships need to be in line with the core values of this organization, and anything going outside of that, Nick is going to be responsible for that. So that's really all I have to say.
Thank you.
Let me just add one point. I was just reminded that for sponsorships, our reporting policy is actually limited to contracts. Sponsorships are not technically considered contracts, so we don't have the same reporting requirement for sponsorships. I believe we list all of our sponsorships on our website, so they are de facto reported. We share. We're very proud of all the sponsorships that we make, but if we want to add that into as an item like our contracts entered into where we report, that's certainly fine. We can start doing that on a monthly basis.
I think that'd be great. I see Director Martinez.
Thank you. I, for one, would appreciate that addition. I think it would be just a good bullet point on our consent calendar. I will be supporting the motion, but I was just wondering from a process standpoint, if the resolution had passed through our subcommittee that looks at marketing.
The marketing subcommittee is tomorrow.
Okay. In the future, I really think it would be helpful if resolutions that come to the full board, if applicable to a subcommittee, run through that process,
okay,
especially if they're not in a rush.
Yeah, no rush on this item, so that makes sense.
Okay, and that I see no more hands. So we have a motion threshold for the CEO to 50,000. We're removing the general counsel authority on the chart, and we're requiring the reporting of all sponsorships to the board at the subsequent board meeting or monthly board meeting. Is that a correct understanding of the motion? Any else? I believe that answer is yes. Okay, no other.
Pardon me.
Haggerty, yes. Go ahead.
So we're dropping Nick to 50.
Yes.
So that means anybody below 50 can still do it, like the chief operating officer, senior director, vice president, or the director, correct?
Yeah, 25, 10, 5, right.
Okay, so what happened to the chief executive officer?
That's Nick, isn't that?
You're right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
I'm not going to support the motion because I don't think it got to what my problem was. I think that, you look, I've seen this happen at the county so many times where somebody approves a organization and come to find out there's some, well, for example, the Oath Keepers. So, you know, I think that we're not that big where Nick can't look at 20, 30, 40 over the course of a year sponsorship applications and approve them. I don't think we're that big yet, so I'm not going to support the motion.
okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands raised. Diana, you have any more comments? No. Okay. So and we
I do have one speaker.
We have one more speaker. Go ahead.
Okay, James, you're unmuted.
Great. Thank you. I was one of the original two that the clerk had mentioned, and I got bumped there by the number 6 person.
Right.
James Hausner, Castro Valley. I want to let you know I do disagree with the concept of sponsorships. You're basically taking money out of the ratepayers' pockets, however small an amount, and giving it to someone else. In looking at the listing of the last 2 years, you don't have a clear definition of what you're trying to accomplish. Little leagues and bands and special events. I'm willing to put a table in my front yard and distribute your materials every afternoon as the walkers go by. So I should apply. Once you start giving money to an organization, they will consider that to be a baseline for future years, which means an ever-growing line item. You're allowing, as I see, elected officials to determine in some cases who gets the money, which will lead to the inevitable questions of why them and not us, or what did the elected get in return. As you're all elected officials, you know much better than I the concept of perception. I am sure there's significant staff time in keeping track of the Form 700s. Why get the FPPC further involved in this situation? Yes, PG&E did this, and one has to wonder if some of their ethical lapses with its disastrous consequences had not taken place if but for their plastering money everywhere. Additionally, the funds they spent were technically from their shareholders' revenue, and I'm sure there's several in attendance that can recall the days of, I have a table of 8 I need to sell for a fundraiser. Let's call Tom. So I disagree with the premise. However, you're are determined to toss money out. How about developing some ratings and a schedule? Ideas would be that areas already in the system, i.e. Castro Valley and the various cities, would rate low. Those that you're negotiating to add to would rate higher, and those areas that you're looking at in the future would rate even higher. Similarly, concepts such as a table for handout materials, introduction of a keynote speaker, ability to give a 5-minute presentation, ability to include a short, say 30-second video into email announcements should be rated and ranked. as well as the number of attendees and the number of market looks through their marketing and advertising program. Further, I recommend that any organization that receives funding in one fiscal year may not apply for funding for the next 2 fiscal years. The way this thing has been described, it appears that the first one at the door gets funded. How about doing a biannual program of some of these deals? Announce up front you're going to allocate funds, get everyone a 30-day period to submit their requests. The requests get rated or ranked either by staff or by your community advisory committee, which in turn will submit the listing to the board of directors for an up or down vote. So those are my thoughts and comments, and I appreciate your time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much. Seeing no more public speakers, we're going to go to a roll call vote on the motion. Madam Clerk?
Alameda County?
No. No.
Thank you. Albany?
Yes.
Berkeley?
Yes.
Dublin?
No.
Emeryville?
Aye.
Fremont?
Yes.
Hayward?
Yes.
Livermore?
Yes.
Newark?
Yes.
Piedmont?
Yes.
Pleasanton?
No.
San Leandro?
Yes.
Tracy?
Yes.
Union City?
Yes.
Oakland?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And now we're on to our next item, which I believe is the CEO report. Is that right?
Indeed.
Okay, Nick?
Stephanie, can you pull up the item, please? Stephanie? You're muted.
Oh, yes, I'm pulling up the item now, prepping to share.
Okay. We had our last executive committee on April 24th, where we focused our discussion on the PCIA. Our next meeting is this coming Friday. We did have a finance committee meeting this past Friday where we gave an initial review of the budget. And we have a marketing, regulatory, and legislative committee tomorrow. And the agenda for that has been posted. On the marketing and account services front, mostly what I wanted to report is give you an update on our COVID-19 relief campaign. So we've launched a page, ebce.org/COVID, where we're outlining both the activity, all the activities that we're pursuing. Oh, Stephanie, we can see you. And that includes the grants that we've given and also customer resources. So one of the things that we've been doing on the customer resource front is we have launched an outreach campaign to promote customer participation in the CARE program. The CARE program is a discount that income qualified customers are eligible for. It typically is a 20 to 30% discount on the electric and gas bill. Recently, the state of California amended some of the eligibility criteria to include recently laid off or furloughed customers. So you don't have to meet sort of the more stringent income eligibility requirements, at least for the short term. And so we've been running a digital ad campaign, reaching out to customers, trying to communicate, in multiple languages, communicating that these new eligibility criteria. We also ran a pilot where we actually identified 100 customers who had delayed payments. And so we surmised that if a customer had a delayed payment, they may be facing some challenges in being able to afford their bill. And so we did outbound calls from our call center to touch base with those customers and let them know that this new resource was available. We're still doing some of the evaluation of the effectiveness of that. I believe we were able to reach around 50 of those 100 customers. The question is, once you reach them and share the information, how many actually signed up? And so there's a little bit more work that goes into actually that sort of second layer of tracking. So we're planning to continue to promote care as an alternative to not paying your bill, because we think, you know, it's better for people to try to stay as current as possible, as than, you know, racking up a big outstanding balance that, you know, eventually is going to come due. You know, as we've discussed, I think in our last two meetings, and Stephanie, could you scroll down to the relief funds? Yeah, here we go. So as we've discussed at our last meeting, we did commit $1.5 million of EBCE funds, and this actually is higher than that because we have secured matching grants and other investment commitments from outside third-party partners. So, you know, right now we're getting close to almost $1.9 million in total relief investments that have been made. And, you know, this gives an outline of the grants that have been made to date. So note that, you know, we only see a handful of city relief grants that have been made. This is mostly due to the fact that we're still, you know, working with each one of your cities to execute a grant agreement. So just today I executed the City of San Leandro's grant agreement. So that didn't make it onto this slide because the grant agreement was just executed. So for those city grants, the city county relief, that was $1.1 million. It's actually going to be 1.115. We are going to be making $5,000 grants to each of our 3 new jurisdictions. So those are in the work, I believe. So in addition to the 1.1 million, we allocated $110,000 to support local healthcare agencies or providers. So far, we have granted 90,000 of that 110,000, and those grants were made to UCS, Children's Hospital of Oakland, St. Rose's in Hayward, the Alameda County Health System, and Access Health in Pleasanton that serves the Tri-Valley. Washington Hospital is one of the other recipients, but we don't have an executed grant agreement with them. So that isn't listed here, but Washington is one of the other recipients. And then finally, we have been making grants to a number of community-based organizations. We initially had a $220,000 budget for that, where we made 22 $10,000 grants. We received over 100 grant applications, and you know, the team did a kind of a really amazing effort to review all of those grants, score all of those grants based on a number of criteria. Each grant, I believe, was scored by at least 3 staff. And then from there, we then, based on the scoring and then also a geographic distribution, because we wanted to make sure that we're giving grants to agencies across the service territory, not just, you know, really good applicants that may be in the North County or the South County or East County. So we wanted to make sure that we had a very strong distribution across Alameda County. And also agencies that did serve Tracy. We do have some recipients who do serve Tracy as well. So that list is here. I'm not going to go through each of them because it's a long list. And then finally, we are working, and it's not listed here, but I'll note, we announced yesterday a an initiative with one of our renewable energy providers. If you recall, in the fall, we approved a contract for a 110 megawatt solar project being built in the Central California area with Clearway Energy. As part of that agreement, we negotiated a $350,000 community benefit fund that at the time was going to be set for investment in Alameda County, in energy programs and local clean energy development activities in Alameda County. So, after COVID, we went to Clearway and we said, look, Clearway, we know that the contract doesn't require you to make any of these funds available until the project comes online in till the project comes online. And sorry, one second. And anyway, so we were able to work with them to bring those funds forward. And so they committed to bring $250,000 immediately forward. To support this initiative. And so to our community relief funds. So there, what we're doing is we're taking $140,000 and we are allocating those to another round of grants. Those are going to be a series of $5,000 grants to some of the entities that applied in this initial sort of solicitation, but maybe didn't make the cut for the first 20. The first 22. We're also taking $50,000 of that grant and purchasing cloth masks and hand sanitizer, which we're going to be partnering with a number of the CBOs that we're providing grants to distribute to different populations, at-risk populations. And then finally, there's $60,000 that is yet to be allocated that we're working with Clearway Energy to determine the best use of funds. Whether is that focused on energy affordability. One thing we're noticing is, a lot of residential customers, everyone's at home, everyone's using more electricity. Are there some resources that we can make available to customers to help them better manage their bills? So that's all. That's all I got there. Happy to answer any further questions.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, any questions on any of the, CEO items? Was there an additional CEO item on your list? That was it. Nick?
That's it.
Okay. Any questions from panelists? I see Councilmember Hannan from Newark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nick, my only question, the number of organizations that applied for grants that did not qualify, did you communicate to them in writing or verbally as to where they were deficient in their application so that they're more successful the next time that they make an application?
We did not. We simply had too many applicants to be able to effectively do. I think we had 150 applicants.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ed Hernandez, please.
Yes, I just want to thank EPE, the board, and Nick for the funds to help the San Leandro community. Those funds, the $78,000 that are being allocated, $50,000 towards small business grants. Those are at least 10 additional grants that we'll be doing at $5,000, $20,000 for food access, and $10,000 to close digital divide and providing some technology resources to residents of San Leandro. So I just want to share that. Excuse me. Output. Getting emotional.
Okay, thank you. Mayor May.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate, Nick, your clarification. because I know when I was looking through the report earlier today, that I was a little bit concerned when I looked at the funding aspect in terms of the healthcare and support, because certainly COVID has no barriers and boundary. And so especially in terms of South County, I just wanted to make sure that we did have some facilities in South County also being included, because certainly the testing efforts have been supported in funding directly by some of the cities first, in hopes that we would get support from the county, but this will be something that will be most welcomed.
Thank you. Councilmember Monroe.
I just wanted to really appreciate the funds that were given to City of Livermore and then used for Access Open Heart Kitchen and Meals on Wheels group. And I appreciate the fact that EBCE is an organization that gives back in this way. I hope that we are able to continue to do this and continue to do it with ever increasing funds.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. No other hands up. Do we have any speakers on any of these, the CEO report items, Madam Clerk?
I do have Blair Beekman signed up, but they lowered their hand, so I'm not sure if they're still planning on speaking or not.
Now the hand's back
the hand
up.
went back up. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. There we go. Blair?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I usually say this as a check to just make sure you can hear me. Thank you. This was an informative item to me. This is, I'm new to the East Bay community energy process. So thank you for your patience, and I'm learning things for the first time. So this was informative for me to start to understand how you work, and these sound like really good projects, and what you can how it's important to me how local community energy can separate itself from, say, PG&E. And so I think this was an example of what you're capable of, and so thank you for this introduction for me.
Great, thank you. This is not an action item, I believe. Yes, that's so we have no action to take. Unless I see any other questions, we're going to move on to our next agenda item. Okay, let's move on. And that is the electric vehicle. Is it the electric vehicle item that next? Transportation.
We have the CEAC report.
Oh, my apologies. Mary Sutter, the Community Advisory Committee report.
Sure. Actually, it's very short. I have nothing to indicate or to share with the group tonight outside of the other items.
Oh, okay. Appreciate that. Are there any speakers on the Community Advisory Committee agenda item?
I do not have speakers for the Community Advisory report.
Okay. So then we'll go to the transportation electrification item. And Nick, who on staff is presenting here?
Hello. I was supposed to.
I'm sorry? What was that?
Blair Beekman has signed up to speak to item 10.
Really?
Okay, Blair, did you want to speak on the last item, Community Advisory Committee report?
No, I'm sorry. I wanted to speak on item 12, which I think I signed up for, which was the electric vehicle.
Yes, we're just starting that now, so we haven't yet.
Sorry to interrupt. Okay,
No
thank you.
Okay, so Nick, who on staff is presenting on this?
It is Jesse Denver. So can we please give Jesse?
Actually, Nick, I'm here and Stephanie's going to drive the deck.
Yeah, perfect. But Stephanie, Jesse, you are going to be presenting. So thank you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So tonight I'm going to be talking to you about Cal EVIP and the opportunity that EBCE has to bring investment dollars from the California Energy Commission to our area for incentives for EV charging infrastructure. Next slide, please. So first I'm going to kind of give an introduction to the Cal EVIP program. Just give a basic primer overview on the types of technologies that we're talking about. We'll go into more detail about the program itself and how the CEC makes selection of counties and regions where they want to invest in, and then talk more specifically about the EBCE CEC relationship and how that works for Cal EVIP. Next slide, please. Thanks. All right, so it's well known that transportation sector is now the largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions, both in Alameda County, in San Joaquin County, and statewide. And EBC is aligned with our local government and other public agency partners in recognizing that the pathway to reducing emissions and congestion is through increasing sustainable trips, those that are made by transit, biking, and walking, while simultaneously electrifying the remaining light, medium, and heavy duty vehicles that are operating on our roadways. So like our local partners and regional colleagues, we know that to electrify these vehicles, whether it's a personal passenger vehicle, a public work fleet vehicle, an urban delivery van, a bus, or a medium duty box truck, we need to streamline the process for getting charging infrastructure installed to fill significant gaps that currently exist in public availability to charging infrastructure. And so the California Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Project, or Cal EVIP, is that streamlined process. Funded by the CEC, the California Energy Commission, Cal EVIP provides investment in a region or county for level 2 and DC or direct current fast charging stations. And currently Alameda County is #1 on the CEC's significant gap list for charging infrastructure, which of course is not a place where we want to be. So in turn, we are being considered for 2021 Cal EVIP investment by the California Energy Commission. And if approved in the June-July timeframe, Cal EVIP will certainly help meet local, regional, and state policy goals tied to improving air quality and human health outcomes, reducing petroleum use and GHG emissions. Cal EVIP will also result in local economic development in the form of near-term jobs and EBC load growth, which I'll get more into in a few slides. So of note in this presentation is that the focus here is on Alameda County, and that is because San Joaquin County already has a Cal EVIP program in place. So the CEC has already directed investment dollars to San Joaquin County, and if we are approved for a program as well, we'll link our program website with the San Joaquin County website and provide technical assistance to stakeholders in the city of Tracy. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at the state's zero emission vehicle and charging infrastructure goals and what needs to be achieved by 2030. So market acceleration for zero emission vehicles, which includes plug-in hybrid EVs, pure battery electric EVs, and fuel cell electric vehicles, is key to California's long-term transportation and climate strategy. And in 2018, Governor Brown issued an executive order that directed to the state to meet a series of milestones with a long-term target of 5 million zero-emission vehicles on California roadways by 2030. That same executive order also established interim 2025 goals: 1.5 million zero-emission vehicles on the road and 250,000 chargers. Today, there is a statewide gap of 81,000 chargers in meeting that 2025 goal. So in Alameda County, we currently have about 35,000 registered zero-emission vehicles. And we essentially need to get to 60,000 by 2025 and 200,000 light, medium, and heavy duty zero emission vehicles on our roadways by 2030. Key to meeting this goal is the availability of charging infrastructure for drivers, which the CEC also recognizes, which is why we're being considered for this investment. Next slide, please. So the National Renewable Energy Lab and another number of other research entities and academics have done consumer surveys to say, you know, what is your barrier to adoption? And whether it's a passenger vehicle that a individual resident drives, or whether it's a fleet vehicle, or whether it's even a public agency and their buses, the biggest barrier to adopting charging infrastructure is the fact that, electric vehicles, is that there is no charging infrastructure. They're unable to charge away from home, and they're not able to charge at home. And this is especially important given that almost half of our residents in Alameda County are renters, and that of our multi-unit dwelling housing stock in Alameda County, over 90% of it is 50 years or older, which also means that it has a lack of electrical capacity to be able to manage charging infrastructure. So we want to ensure that there's publicly accessible charging infrastructure that's convenient to where near people live and are commuting and or doing business. Next slide, please. So before we get started, I just want to level set and make sure that you all know the kind of charging infrastructure that we're talking about. Level 1 charging is the kind of charging that you would do at home, where you just you plug into a typical 120 volt socket. Level 2 kind of increases your charging time, decreases your charging time with a higher voltage, so a 240 or like a dryer outlet kind of charging. And then DC fast charging is what's done away from home, as is level 2 charging. So Cali VIP only invests in level 2 and DC fast charging and is applicable for almost all use cases except for single family homes. So single family homeowners, single family renters are not eligible for installing charging infrastructure where they live, except for at multi-unit dwellings, and that charging infrastructure needs to be shared. Next slide, please. All right, so since last May, EBCE has been working with the California Energy Commission to bring Cal EVIP investment into Alameda County for calendar year 2021. And EBCE is the primary co-funding partner in Alameda County for Cal EVIP. And we're one of a handful of entities that are currently under consideration for this investment. Our neighbors at MCE and at Clean Power SF in San Francisco are also being considered for investment. So we're certainly trying to put our best foot forward to ensure that we receive as much of the CEC's investment as possible. And although this is non-competitive, again, we're certainly trying to put our best foot forward. So there are 3 primary areas that the CEC evaluates when selecting projects for investment. And I'll discuss each of these in more detail. So the first is using an analysis tool called EVI Pro. Next slide, please. And the California Energy Commission developed this tool with the National Renewable Energy Lab to estimate the amount of charging infrastructure that's needed to meet the state's goals. And what you can see here is that there is a significant gap in Alameda County for charging infrastructure. So the Cal EVIP tool estimates the high and low end gaps for charging infrastructure availability, and then plans for those future investments based on the low end gap. So the role of a co-funding partner like EBCE and the investment that we bring to the table on top of the CEC's investment further has the ability to bridge the gap that we're really trying to close. So again, what you see here is that investment through Cali VIP in Alameda County is pretty urgent. Under Cal EVIP, these are just some examples of the kind of site hosts who will be eligible to apply for these incentive funds. So multifamily property owners, public agencies, hospitals, retail locations, shopping centers, medical offices, fleets, as long as the fleet vehicles don't have a designated parking spot and the charging infrastructure is shared, and workplaces. For a DC fast charging infrastructure, there are also very specific requirements around the type of sites that can host DC fast charging infrastructure. And there are a few examples here, and those must be open and accessible to the public 24/7. Next slide, please. So the second variable in the CEC selection is that co-funding partner. And for Alameda County, that is EBCE. And what we're aiming for is at least a one-to-one investment for what the CEC will bring to the table and what EBCE will bring to the table. So last May, we submitted a required non-binding letter of intent, and we asked the CEC to invest $15 to $30+ million into Alameda County based on our gap and need. And then we also looked at what other people, other entities who have been co-funding partners of Cal EVIP programs in the past, what they've brought to the table and what they've actually received from the CEC. And to be competitive, we said that we would commit $16 million over 4 years for a 4-year program on top of what the CEC would bring to the table. And we just recently revised that for $14.5 million, which would be allocated to incentives. And we'll take $1.5 million that we previously had allocated to incentives from a current budget allocation for fiscal year 20 that's already been approved. And we'll carve that out so that EBCE can actually own some charging infrastructure. So there's a number of benefits with this co-funding model that Alameda County will realize. And the first is filling the gaps is a priority for our local government partners in their climate action plans and for regional colleagues, including the Air District, who is actively working to spur EV adoption and expand networks of charging stations. And for the MTC, who has included the need for charging infrastructure incentives as a regional strategy in both Plan Bay Area 2040 and their freight emissions reduction plans. So transportation electrification and charging infrastructure incentives are specifically also recommended in EBCE's local development business plan. Other benefits, this is a one-time opportunity for Alameda County to bring this investment into our community. It's currently in the governor's budget, but it may not be in the future. So we really need to take advantage of this opportunity now. And deploying these near-term shovel-ready EV charging infrastructure projects will create quality jobs across the economic supply chain, which of course is more important than ever right now. These jobs include electrical trade jobs, engineering and design of charging infrastructure, operation and maintenance of that charging infrastructure, along with customer service designs. Cali VIP also brings other economic development opportunities, as well as GHG emission reductions, which I'll cover in a few slides from now. And finally, the CEC requires that co-funding partners work with the Center for Sustainable Energy, who is a nonprofit entity and the only entity authorized to administer Cal EVIP programs statewide. So we will be signing a contract, if we were approved, with the Center for Sustainable Energy for their services. And this includes application and incentive processing, education and outreach, providing customer service to our community members, website management, and much, much more. Next slide, please. So how many chargers would the CEC aim to deploy with their investment in Alameda County? Just walking through these bullets quickly, the low end gap for both workplace and public level 2 charging. We need more than 6,400 level 2 chargers. Right now, there's about 1,200 level 2 chargers. So the low end gap is over 5,200 chargers. And historically, the CEC's investment has addressed 50% of the low end gap for level 2 chargers. So in Alameda County, based on an investment by the CEC of approximately $20 million, this would be about 2,600 level 2 chargers. For multifamily, the number is exponential. Multifamily is an untapped customer segment that we really need to lend support to, and has yet to transition to zero emission vehicles because of that need for access to charging infrastructure, either at or near where they live, where renters live. For public DC fast charging, CEC has historically funded 30% of the low end gap. So this would result in 145 new DC fast chargers in Alameda County. And essentially EBCE's co-funding would double that impact and help us get closer to closing more of the gap. Next slide, please. So based on the investment by the CEC and EBCE, these are the additional local economic benefits that I had referenced earlier. So essentially what you see here is a growth model for the electric vehicles that we need to deploy. Again, this is not just passenger light duty vehicles. This is fleet vehicles, medium duty delivery vehicles, kind of class 3 through 6 vehicles. This is also urban delivery vehicles and other kinds of fleets, shuttle buses, all kind of applicable for charging infrastructure. What this won't cover is heavy duty, and we have a whole separate kind of pathway that we're working on to start working with stakeholders in that sector. So looking at the growth of electric vehicles to help the state reach its 2025 and 2030 goals, you can see that right now we have a little over 35,000 electric vehicles registered to drivers in Alameda County. By 2022, that needs to grow by 11%, 24, 12%, 26, 25%. And luckily, this is also the year that Bloomberg and Bloomberg New Energy Finance is estimating that electric vehicles will reach cost parity with internal combustion engine vehicles. So from here, because we've also invested upfront in the charging infrastructure necessary, we would anticipate to see an additional jump in growth in electric vehicle adoption, again, by multiple customer segments throughout the end of the decade. So this new growth also means that we would see a reduction, significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see those numbers there, both by 2026 and by 2030. In turn, this results in additional load for EBCE through increased electricity usage, again, not using fossil fuels, but rather using local energy, electricity, to be able to power the VMT on our roadways, vehicle miles traveled. And that in turn also results in additional revenue for EBCE. So based on our $14.5 million investment, we would essentially see a return on investment on that by 2025, 2026. And this doesn't even account for the charging infrastructure that we plan to own with that $1.5 million carve out that I noted was associated with a 2020 budget allocation, because for those chargers, we'll be able to also take advantage of the California Air Resources Board's low carbon fuel standard program, where we can generate credits on the sale of electricity as a transportation fuel, and sell those credits as revenue that we can turn back around into beneficial programs and incentives for the community. Next slide, please. All right, quickly, this slide is just saying we're not the only ones who have brought co-funding investment to Cal EVIP. As you can see, there are Cal EVIP programs in Fresno, San Joaquin counties, Los Angeles, Sacramento counties. Sacramento's was a partnership with SMUD. And other CCAs have also committed to co-fund Cal EVIP projects. Monterey Bay had a project that's launched in 2019. And Sonoma Clean Power, Peninsula Clean Energy, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and San Jose all will be launching projects this year. Next slide, please. The last variable that goes into the CEC kind of selecting projects is compliance with a law that was passed in 2015 called AB 1236. And AB 1236 requires that permitting processes by cities and counties of all sizes has to be streamlined, and that city and county has to have had passed an ordinance streamlining their processes for EV charging infrastructure permitting and posting a checklist of what that process looks like on a publicly accessible website. And for all 2021 projects, the CEC decided to require full compliance with AB 1236. And this is because on those previously noted Cal EVIP projects, they were seeing significant delays in deployment of charging infrastructure because of inconsistent permitting processes. So for 2021 investment, they want to make sure that everyone is streamlined. So last year, EBCE started working with each of our cities and the county to provide technical assistance that helped everyone get up to speed. Good news is that what you see here is that most of Alameda County is in the green, which means streamlined. And as of last week, I didn't have a chance to update this slide, but Hayward and Union City are both now green. And our outstanding communities that have yet to streamline, who are considered not streamlined, are Albany and Newark. Albany has a pathway to streamlining their processes, and we're working with them. And I know Newark is present, so we haven't been able to get a hold of Newark staff, but our offer for technical assistance stands, and we'd love to follow up with you after this so that we can make sure that we get you streamlined. Because if we are approved by the CEC for investment, only stakeholders in communities where their permitting processes are streamlined will have access to the incentives for charging infrastructure. If your community is not streamlined, stakeholders will not have access to that charging infrastructure incentive money. And then this last bullet for going above and beyond and helping our community streamline permitting processes for charging infrastructure, we were recognized by the governor's office with their first ever ZEVI award. Next slide, please. So here's the timeline that we've been working on for Cal EVIP and bringing this incentive money to Alameda County. So we first started working, as I noted, in 2019 with the CEC. That included us submitting a non-binding letter of intent to bring approximately $16 million to the project in co-funding support. March, we finished or wrapped up kind of project customization, and we did that in conjunction with the California Energy Commission and the Center for Sustainable Energy. And this is really important to note because the CEC has something known as pillar requirements for Cal EVIP. These are requirements that cannot be negotiated. They are anchor tenant requirements, pillar requirements, of the CEC's Cal EVIP program. So that includes the type of eligible sites for the different kinds of charging technologies. It includes the specifications around charging technologies. It includes some of the incentive levels. So when we talk about project customization, this is what we're talking about. And we cannot change the pillar requirements, but we can go above and beyond some of the pillar requirements. And that's what we were negotiating with the California Energy Commission, is some specific areas that I'll talk briefly about in just a moment. So this month we have pencils down due date at the end of this month for the scope of work with the Center for Sustainable Energy, the budget, and the general terms and conditions of the agreement, which RWG has reviewed with the Center for Sustainable Energy's legal folks as well. June, July is the time frame the CEC anticipates selecting 2021 projects. And then what would come next is that our project would then be publicly workshopped by the California Energy Commission to get statewide stakeholder feedback on the pillar requirements and the two kind of above and beyond requirements that I noted we negotiated with the CEC. And then we would launch the project in 2021. And all of these steps have been taken kind of early in advance of projects actually being selected, because what the CEC has seen in the past is delays by stakeholders that in kind of negotiating these terms and conditions and budgets and scope of works and whatnot that have actually delayed program launch. So they're trying to avoid that for 2021 projects. Next slide, please. So I only have this last slide. And it goes over the pillar requirements associated with incentive levels. So I'll just walk through these individually. So for level 2 charging, there's a $4,500 per connector or $7,500 project cost incentive. For DC fast chargers, which come in two kind of buckets with regards to how fast they charge. There is a $50,000 incentive or 75% of the total project costs for 50 to 99 kW DC fast chargers. And then for higher fast charging, there's a $70,000 incentive. There are additional rebates for projects that are located in disadvantaged communities or AB 1550 low income community areas. And this is really important to mention because a key focus of Cal EVIP is investments in charging infrastructure in DAC and low income communities. And again, this is really important because it's anticipated that EVs will be at cost parity with internal combustion engine vehicles by 2025, 2026. And again, the use case for this charging infrastructure is not exclusive to residents who are drivers of single occupancy vehicles, but commuters, including rideshare drivers, public agencies that manage and operate fleets, private sector fleets, urban delivery fleets, medium delivery fleets that operate in and around our most vulnerable communities. So we really need to make these investments now, both for current EV drivers and for future EV drivers, including fleets. So again, what can be changed is going above and beyond these pillar requirements. And a few of the things that we were able to get initial approval on is carving out a certain percentage of the overall DC fast charge budget, which is still to be determined, for properties, for affordable housing properties that are outside of DAC low income areas. So what you see there is that there's an adder for multi-unit dwellings, and there's an adder for multi-unit dwellings that are in DACs. But we also have affordable multi-unit dwellings out in the Tri-Valley area and some other areas of our community that are not actually in a DAC or low-income census tract area. So we wanted to make sure that these affordable housing providers had equal access to the incentive dollars across our community. The second area where we've gone above and beyond is making sure that there's a carve out for a certain amount of the money that we invest for DC fast charge hubs that are located near our multi-unit dwelling hotspots. So we've actually mapped all of our multi-unit dwellings in Alameda County and kind of found where the clusters of those 5 or more unit multi-unit dwellings are. And then we overlaid that with available charging infrastructure, DAC low income boundaries, and how convenient it is to walk a square mile in any direction to the nearest charging infrastructure, and found significant gaps. And again, because a lot of our multifamily properties, actually the majority of our multifamily properties are 50 years old or older, it's going to be tough to install charging infrastructure at a lot of these properties. So we want to make sure that we're also deploying fast charging infrastructure that's convenient for these residents, that enables the renter community to be able to make the transition to EVs. And also, you know, just a co-benefit of that is that these areas also are very close to our interstates and highways, so they can also be highly utilized by commuters and others. If we are selected by the CEC, we'd actually love to come back and give you a presentation specifically on this, and specifically on the mapping analysis that we did that led to the CEC's initial approval of this. Again, both of these kind of above and beyond pillar requirements will need to be workshopped, and then the CEC later this summer would give their final approval on these requirements. All right, last slide. So what we're asking today is for the board to first approve our participation in the 2021 Cal EVIP program if we are selected by the CEC. We are also asking that you approve the co-funding incentives in $14.5 million of co-funding incentives over the next 4 years, 2021 to 2024. So that's $4 million a year essentially. Well, actually it's a little less than that. And approve EBCE to enter into an agreement with the Center for Sustainable Energy to manage and administer the funds, both the CEC funds and EBCE's co-funding investment for Cal EVIP. So thank you so much for your time, and I welcome all and any questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I know that was a lengthy presentation, but this is an action item, and this is actually a very exciting program. So thank you very much for all your good work. And we're going to, let's first take a public comment on this, and then we'll see if there are any questions from board members. Madam Clerk.
This item, I have Audrey Ichinose, Seda Dumas, Jessica Tovar, Blair Beekman, and Aleda Dupree.
Okay, let's, I'm going to ask people to keep it to 2 minutes each, please.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, who's up first? Jessica, I think it looks like you're up first.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Okay, great.
Yep.
I had no idea. Sorry. So on behalf of East Bay Clean Power Alliance, not sure if you were able to see our letter that we submitted this afternoon, but we did have some concerns around the context of our situation under COVID, as well as in general, just the concern around how many communities are not able to purchase electric vehicles. And now that we are in a pandemic and a shutdown, a lot of people are actually out of work or underemployed. And just noting that this project, that this budget would make up about 70% of our entire local development business plan budget over the next 4 years, is concerning to us, because we do think that we could be doing a lot better to incentivize communities that are normally shut out of the clean energy economy. Noting also that, our communities are, on the, coming off of the heels of like displacement or gentrification from big tech, and just really needing to address how do we incentivize communities who cannot afford clean energy vehicles or cannot drive clean energy vehicles. How do we incentivize like public transit, paratransit, AC transit, other type of shuttles in the community, replacing dirty municipal fleets. There's just so much more that we have noted here that we could be doing in the community, and addressing equity in this project, versus just the expectation that people are going to go out and buy electric vehicles.
Seda, you're unmuted. And for the speakers, please remember to state what part of our jurisdiction you're calling from.
Okay, this is Ceyda Durmaz Dogan from Oakland. I'm with Local Clean Energy Alliance. Just last month, you were talking about how the pandemic will impact EBC and how many ratepayers won't be able to pay their utility bills. And now all of a sudden, you started talking about EBC spending $16 million in the next 4 years on a project that only a few privileged people can benefit from. The staff and some of the community advisory committee members talked about this as an opportunity because California Energy Commission will be matching the funding. I think in the middle of this crisis, when many people in Alameda County are becoming unemployed or underemployed and unable to pay their utility bills, investing $4 million into this project doesn't make sense. EBC's act looks like someone leaving home to get food with their limited budget, then getting distracted on the way in front of the jewelry shop because of a 50% discount, and then ending up spending all their money on jewelry because there was a great deal. When the EBC staff introduced the equity metrics to evaluate the benefits of local development projects last October, they briefly mentioned this charging infrastructure project and showed us that it satisfies all the social equity metrics, participation, environmental, and job creation. And even back then, we mentioned that we had a problem with how EBC evaluates the LDBP projects and wanted to be part of the discussion about developing equity metrics. And that issue never came back to the agenda. Now we see that you have already decided to spend 70% of the LDBP budget on this project without asking for any feedback from the community. We would like to see EBC using the LDBP budget for transportation electrification projects, but projects that everyone could benefit from, such as electric public transportation tech. Thanks.
Thank you, Seda. Our chair, Calb, got dropped off, and this is Vice Chair Martinez. Stephanie, if there is another speaker, line them up, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Vice. Alita Dupree for the record. I'm not in the utility district at this time, but when I am, I stay in Oakland. I have spoken to the CAC in monitoring this. This is very, very important work. I am a lifelong renter since adult, and for me to have a clean energy vehicle is imperative to me because it is less expensive for me to own and operate. I don't have one at this time. And I see this program as offering a blend of services to various segments with the emphasis on shared use. There is big opportunity in this, and the idea of electric utility districts and companies partnering with transportation is not new. Probably the largest such partnership is between the New York Power Authority and the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, which runs a legendary and historic subway system, several railroads, a growing fleet of electric buses, and Grand Central Terminal, 3 billion kilowatt hours a year, $450 million. So we are ripe for opportunity, because the thing is, there will be cars and there will be buses, and they should all be running on clean renewable energy instead of burning gasoline and diesel fuel. So this is an investment in the future of our utility district, a public agency that represents the people. I am grateful for the opportunity to come and have a say in this. This program is worthy of your approval tonight, so we can get to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Alita. Next speaker, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Oh, great. Thanks. This is Audrey Ichinose, East Bay Clean Power Alliance. And I would like to add a few things that have not already been mentioned. One is that there are a lot of things to like about this proposal, especially the significant matching funds from the California Energy Commission and the focus on the electrification of medium and heavy duty vehicles, which in California should have begun yesterday. But there are a lot of problems with this funding proposal. It has serious drawbacks. As Jessica Tovar mentioned, 70% of the local development funds over the next 4 years is too much. And it also reduces our flexibility to respond to upcoming, unforeseeable and surely coming needs. So this budget allocation also seriously questions EBCE's commitment to social equity. And I don't need to go through all the ways in which incentives, are held out that will not benefit disadvantaged and underserved communities. But let me say this, that with all due respect, I hope the board will not approve this proposal unless it promises, it guarantees at least, I'm going to say 3 million. That sounds a lot in these times, but maybe not this year, but a $3 million supplement to the local development budget, if not this year, then for each of the next 3 years. And an alternative could be that the board could approve this proposal if it can come up with funds or backing outside of EBCE to help this proposal make it to July, when the CEC is supposed to make its selection of the counties that are behind and most in need of EV charging. So the important principle should be developing the EV charging infrastructure for Alameda County will bring the county wide benefits, but it should not be pursued, much less achieved on the backs, so to speak, of our most disadvantaged communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry I dropped off for a minute. Thank you, Councilmember Martinez, for sharing. And we have, is it one more speaker, public speaker?
Hello, this is Blair Beekman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Let me find my speech real quick here. Okay, ready to go. We are at a time to very much reconsider the responsibilities local community energy should have, and which should already be available to ourselves, and how to work towards more positive energy sustainability ideas and infrastructure by 2023 to 25. Mass transit is possibly going to have a large setback in the next few years. In working with the public practices of the VTA, Public Transit of Santa Clara County, the past couple of years, I have learned an important term that you don't sell the farm of mass transit and its good local government practices in order to have more entrepreneurial public transit projects. In what was a previous somewhat bitter push and pull between government mass transit and more entrepreneurial public transit ideas of the BTA in the past few years, it has since mellowed out of late with a more friendly balance and agreements for all sides at this time. Overall, I hope we are learning we don't have to lose previous good practices since the arrival of COVID-19. However, I think it has to be a new consideration and return to ideas of more genuine sustainability practices at this time, as this is how to move. We can all move forward in healing terms as a society at this time. If EBCE projects like the electric cars are slated for around 70% of the EBCE budget at this point, can possibly this be scaled back to 30 or 40%? And again, I hope I can ask for a commitment towards sustainable positive energy practices as this East Bay Community Energy has been a good example to the entire Bay Area and the country of what can be good practices. And we all have a personal inventory process we have to go through since the PG&E nuclear deal of last month. So good luck. I heard some good efforts today, and good luck in how we can talk about this in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I believe that's all the public speakers, if I understand correctly. So we'll now bring it back to our board members. And let's see, I see 2 hands raised. Everybody should raise their hand if you want to speak to this item. First is Mayor Pilch of Albany.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the comments about equity. I think we should definitely keep that in mind. But I will note that the market for used EVs is very good. They can be purchased much, much cheaper than the other used gas vehicles. And there are programs out there to assist with the purchase of EV for low income people. So that must be kept in mind. I did appreciate the comment though about electrifying public transit and funds going to that. I think that's that should also be it's not part of the purview of this item, but that should also be pursued. I'm dismayed and embarrassed that Albany was not compliant with AB 1236. Let me know what I can do to help with that. I do support this proposal. I have been participating in the EV Coordinating Council, which is a body of the formed by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and every time it meets, it notes the gap in infrastructure, the need between what infrastructure is there and the need. In the Bay Area, it's the worst. We have a lot of vehicles and not nearly enough infrastructure. So the benefits to this we can already see during COVID. We already see the air clean up tremendously because transportation is a huge producer of greenhouse gases. So getting more electric vehicles on the road, if we have to have vehicles on the road, will fix that. It is an investment in the future. It is a revenue opportunity, but we just have one question finally to staff, which is that is this part of the budget of a local development business plan, or is it separately allocated money? Thank you.
So for this fiscal year, it is in the local development business plan. We're obviously not taking up future budgets this year. So that would be evaluated in the context of a future budget. What we're making here is a financial commitment from the organization, not from a specific budget category.
Okay, it seems like we're trying to take advantage of an opportunity that might go away. So I still support this item. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say that from reading the staff report, Nick, I was under the impression that this was coming out of the local development business plan. If you read under the section under fiscal and policy impacts, you might see how people were led to believe that. But I'd be pleased to learn that if it weren't, I mean, outside of this year.
Look, we don't control the budget in any future years. I think that's sort of the context that I'm making, is that would be our expectation, is that it would come out of local development because that's where we fund programs. But if the board tells us to fund it out of something else in a future year, then that's your prerogative. I think our expectation would be, yes, this is a local development expense, so it would come from there, but you say to fund it from something else, we can do that.
It's also our prerogative on how to allocate that whole pie. So it's not necessarily at the detriment of other local programs. I had some questions for staff. Number one, Jesse, you might have the answer to this. Would these funds be able to be used for fleet upgrades and fleet charging?
Yes, absolutely. And right now we're actually funding municipal fleet electrification assessments and plans for 4 communities. And we have 2 more that we're hoping to be able to support, all in an effort to get them in a place where they know exactly where they need to put charging infrastructure for which vehicles and how those are going to transition over the next 5 to 7 years. Mm-hmm. In anticipation of having Cal EVIP incentive dollars for those municipal fleets to be able to access.
Great. My second question is, if we are selected and they designate a portion of these funds to EBCE, are we committed to accepting all of those funds upfront or at once, or are they payable upon completion of projects? How does that part work?
Yeah, great question. All of the CEC's investment comes in year 1. So if, for example, they were to allocate $20 million to the Alameda County Cal EVIP project, we would see all of that in 2021.
Okay.
And historically, level 2 dollars tied to that investment will last over a few years, but DC fast charge dollars go out the door pretty quick. And so then that's where EBCE's co-funding investment fills in the blanks as the dollars start to go out the door.
Can you elaborate a little more on how you came up with a $16 million number for the co-investment?
Sure. Well, we looked at some of our neighboring communities who have 2020 projects in the works, and also communities throughout the state who had committed co-funding partnerships, and what the CEC had invested in those communities. And given the size of Alameda County and the number of vehicles that we need to transition to help meet the state's goals, it was essentially an ask to the CEC of somewhere between $15 and $33 million, with what we're really hoping is kind of around a $20-25 million investment. And for that, we would be aiming for, at least a 1-to-1. But to make us competitive, or to have the CEC see us as a very invested partner, that $4 million a year over 4 years was the number that we felt really comfortable with, to ensure that we were able to help fill as much of the gap as possible.
Okay, thank you. That answers my questions. You're muted, Mr. Chair.
I apologize. Mike?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, you're up.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent report. I greatly appreciate the time that you put into preparing the report. My only comment is a suggestion. When you talk about the tonnage of emissions that will be reduced, it's always nice to have a comparison in terms of what is the current output, so that residents or those that are reviewing the information can see a comparative value as to the emissions that are being saved. So I might suggest that maybe just a footnote either as to the amount of tonnage that a vehicle may put out in any given year, so that people can see the savings in terms of the emissions to the environment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, Mayor May, you're up.
Yes, so thank you for this opportunity to better understand this program. Is someone still, sorry, this is not my background noise, so I'm not sure where it's coming from. Thank you. No, so I was saying that I do agree with a lot of the speakers and the comments, and as our city has a lot of electric vehicles, I think we're probably the largest amount per any zip code. and for some logical reasons. But I am definitely concerned about having the accessibility, especially to transportation, public transportation. And we are building some very large affordable housing complexes and projects right near the BART station. And so I would certainly welcome this type of opportunity to ensure that those who are in those projects and developments would be able to have the ability to charge their vehicles. So this is something that I would strongly support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Monroe from Livermore.
Hi. So some of my questions have already been answered or others have raised them. I'm very interested in the infrastructure, the large vehicle infrastructure. We've just recently looked at a new garbage, waste disposal contract. We believe that the vehicles currently out there aren't quite up to where we want them to be. How would this play out in terms of, as the technology develops forward? I mean, this is a 1-year proposition. Whole lot's going to change next year, both in terms, I'm expecting both in terms of economy, the way that commutes happen and don't happen. Is there any way to think about that going forward? And that may be well without this, outside of the scope of this. And then I also just want to do a plug for Gillig, which makes electric buses. So yay. And they're Livermore.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Councilmember Mandel, please.
Thank you. You had to bring up Gillig, which you stole from us a couple of years ago.
I'm so sorry. No.
It's okay. I was glad they could stay in Alameda County when they needed to expand. So a couple things. Nick, I'm trying to recall our Finance Committee presentation on the budget. It's my recollection that we weren't able to spend all the LDBP funds this year. Am I correct on that? And what was the amount that was unspent in this last fiscal year?
Let me pull up the numbers. So what I'll say is we do have an we had $1.5 million from this past year that we are actually, last year we specifically set aside, for what we thought would be the EVIP program. Hey. And so of that, say $16 million, in a sense, 1.5 million has already been funded. So the net amount is going to be less. So if we were to approve the 4 million from this year, we would only have, what was that? Okay.
2.5.
Yeah. 10.5 million left for the following 3 years.
And the unfunded, the unallocated amount from this year's budget, my recollection is that it was a total of 3 million. Maybe half of that was the 1.5 you're referring to. But
I think that's right. I think there were some funds, though I do believe that some of those funds, and JP, jump in here too. I believe some of those funds are actually earmarked, so it's not truly a
Yeah, Nick, I'll jump in here. So Councilmember Mandel, there is, and you'll see it in the budget presentation, there's about 1.3 million of kind of earmarked dollars that we are still planning to spend through kind of in the remainder of FY20. And some of those projects will continue out into FY21, obviously, since we're really closing out the year. So as Nick said, there's the 1.5 from FY20 that we really look to pay forward for this EVIP investment. But the entire budget from this fiscal year, from FY20, is either kind of spent, contracted, or earmarked for some ongoing programs that will be currently running or running into the early part of next year.
And I'll give you. Oh, sorry, Al.
So that's what I needed. So I guess where I was kind of going with this is, I think the first year LDP budget was 2 million. Last year it was around 6. And I think the main limitation was that we didn't think we could spend more. And, you know, we were correct, right? We're not even spending all the 6. You know, me personally, if there are programs, LDB programs that we can spend money on, that's going to be a priority for me to fund. Projects like this are fantastic. It's exactly what we should be doing. You know, every single car out there that gasoline car that we replace with an electrical vehicle is a 100% reduction in the greenhouse gases from that gasoline vehicle. And for low-income folks who may not own their own home or have a garage or whatever, you know, the biggest impediment, the 2 biggest impediments are cost and the inability to charge, you know, where they live or where they work. And this is directly addressing that. This is, you know, it's not going to help me. You know, I've got a garage, I can plug in, I don't need this help. It's folks who don't have availability, don't have access to a charging station, lower income folks, middle income folks, those are the ones who we're going to be helping, renters especially. And with a high renter population in Hayward, that's definitely something I'm excited about. I think this is great. I think that JP, when you come back, you know, next year or the year after, and you say, hey, I've got, you know, all these programs I'd like to spend money on, can I please have more? I'm looking forward to that conversation. And I think many of us on the board are. And yeah, but the answer is not to say, no, it's not, let's not do good stuff because, you know, we don't want to, you know, invest money in the local development program. It's exactly the opposite. Let's go for it. I'm going to make a motion to support staff's recommendation. Thank you.
Second.
Okay, who was the second?
Aragine.
Okay, and Jesse, you're up now. If you have anything more to say.
Well, I was going to make a motion, so Al beat me to that. But
Okay.
I just want to thank EBCE for the work with local jurisdictions to look at how to transition our municipal fleet to electric. Berkeley is one of those communities that's working with the EBCE to look at electrifying our entire fleet, which also includes our zero waste trucks and other heavy trucks. And I think that's really going to be essential to meeting Berkeley's zero emission goals, and also there's added benefit to the agency as well. So thank you. I think this perfectly aligns with I think many of our jurisdictions' climate action plans and our goals to promote electrification, and I strongly support this program.
Thank you. Councilmember Melissa Hernandez, please.
Yes, I just wanted to add, that definitely this is the right way to be headed. The fact because of the for us trying to be able to meet our goals in the future, not only for the county but for our cities. But just to add, we have a lot of low income, or we have our fair share of the low income housing rentals in the city of Dublin, and we've always tried to work with developers to try to get extra charging stations close to them so that they're able to utilize them as well. So just food for thought.
Thank you. Supervisor Haggerty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to see if we could down the road some way to prioritize some of the lower income housing areas. Lots of times we hear that it's too expensive to put the infrastructure in, so the landlords won't do it. But if we could help them with incentives to do it, then maybe they would, which would afford low-income people to be able to charge at home. I would also say this, that I think it's great, that we're leveraging this money, but I think we should also throw our hand out to the Air District, because they're doing a lot of this work, and we could maybe, take the dollars we're getting, maximize them through the CEC, and then take their dollars and maximize them through the Air District. So I don't think the handout stops with the CEC. I think we can keep going and leverage these projects at Air District.
Thank you. I don't see their hands up. I just want to concur with the general notion that let's make sure some meaningful portion of this money is helping and inviting and facilitating usage of this infrastructure by lower and moderate income people, multi-unit buildings, and so forth. I think our staff are well aware of what that means, and I'm sure the Energy Commission is quite aware of that as well. But I think what you're hearing from the board is let's make sure how we spend this money, assuming we get it, it keeps that in mind. Okay, Nick, final thought?
Yes, my final thought is that we did get a letter of support from the Air District for this grant.
Excellent. Okay, I see no more thoughts, hands. So a motion and a second is on the table. So Madam Clerk, please call the roll. Stephanie? Oops.
Can't hear you.
Alameda County.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yes.
Albany.
Yes.
Berkeley.
Yes.
Dublin.
Yes.
Emeryville.
Aye.
Fremont.
Yes.
Hayward.
Yes.
Livermore.
Yes.
Newark.
Aye.
Piedmont.
Aye.
Pleasanton.
Yes.
San Leandro.
Yes.
Tracy.
Yes.
Union City.
Yes.
Oakland.
Aye.
Thank you. Vote passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you, Jesse, on staff. Appreciate all your tremendous work, and a lot more work to do, of course, and appreciate the whole team. And we're moving on to our next item, and I believe, is that the budget, or did I miss one here?
Yes, that's right, the budget.
Okay.
Stephanie?
Just to remind everybody, we are not voting on any budget question tonight. This is a preliminary or initial presentation, and then we will get more information and vote, and expected to vote on it at our June meeting. Okay, go ahead.
Great, well, thank you, everyone. I will try to be as brief as I can, given the sort of amount that's in this presentation. So with that, I'll just jump in. Can we go directly to slide number 3? Okay, one moment here. Okay, great. So, I think this is sort of the high level intro here. I think what I want to say is, what we've put forward here is, our best effort to arrive at a balanced budget. We've talked at length about some of the challenges that we face related to significant increases in the PCIA, and now the current significant economic recession. With those two factors, though, we have found a path between, I think, really diligent management of our energy costs, reductions in overhead expense, and some changes to our procurement practices that the board has already taken to arrive at what constitutes effectively a balanced budget. And given the fact that we've had 2 very strong financial years, I think we're well positioned, in this following year, if we are able to execute on this budget, for continued economic strength, and which in turn allows us to continue to make investments in things like local development and more clean energy. I will note that some of the core assumptions that we'll get into on this sort of base case budget do assume a reduction in our discount from 1.5% to 1%. It does assume an increase in the cost of Brilliant 100 from parity with PG&E to 3% above PG&E. We'll get into those details a little bit later. It does, though, include maintaining our local development budget at more or less parity to where it was last year. It's actually a modest increase in the budget. So, and then we didn't include in our base case the revenues and expenses associated with our 3 new communities, and that's largely because those expenses and revenues are going to largely depend on when those communities join our program, and because the board hasn't formally taken action to determine when that should occur. We include it as a scenario more than anything. Our plan at this point is in June to bring an item forward to the board for discussion and potentially action on new community integration and that timing. Next slide, please. So here, we did want to present our budget to actuals. This was something that I think we felt would be some helpful context of how we did. What we found here, more than anything, is we are already starting to see some of the impacts of the change to the PCIA. Our sales are down $18 million. 18 million is a big number, but in the context of $468 million, it's actually, pretty small, roughly a couple percent. And, we think that's largely due to the fact that on May 1st, we did have a significant increase in the PCIA that went into effect, tightening our margin. Whereas, in our budget forecast, in our budget that we approved last year, we didn't forecast that, obviously, because we didn't know exactly what the magnitude of the PCI increase would be at that time. I think another thing just to note here is you sort of see consistently our actuals come in below our budget. Well, that's on purpose, right? We always want to put a budget that we're very comfortable executing to, and we're always going to work to beat the budget, right? We don't want to come in and say, well, we spent more on personnel, we spent more on legal, we spent more on professional services than we budgeted. So we always build that budget with an expectation that we can get there, kind of no matter what comes at us. But all things being equal, what we're finding, again, as I mentioned, is very strong financial performance last year, over $60 million of kind of margin that we can contribute to our reserves and our ability to sort of make it through what's going to be a challenging year. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, great. Perfect. Here, number 5. So this is our revenue projection. What this really illustrates, this almost $96 million reduction, is the effect of the PCIA. We've talked about it extensively. The circumstances over the last couple months haven't really changed, that significantly. And so, the assumptions around the trigger, around when the next round of PCIA increases are are stated here. But that almost $96 million impact is driven by that. It would be higher, but for some of the changes to the value proposition that we're providing. So there is that 0.5% reduction in the discount. Let me spend a little time talking about the increase in cost in Brilliant 100. Part of the reason why we are proposing this as sort of the base case is what we've been finding over the last really 2 years is that the cost of Brilliant 100 is more than 1.5% higher than Bright Choice. If you recall, Bright Choice is 1.5% below PG&E. Brilliant 100 is priced at parity with PG&E. Now, that margin differential is okay when both rates are in the money, and so we're generating positive margin from both products. And so, I think that's a policy choice that the agency makes to say, we're willing to accept slightly lower margin because it's 100% carbon free. But as we've seen our margins compress so significantly to the point where we're largely at what we expect to be break even for the fiscal year, we felt that it was time to modify Brilliant 100 to bring it in line with what we think the costs to procure Brilliant 100 are. And so based on our projections of the PCIA and PG&E's rates over the next year, we think the cost to procure Brilliant 100 is roughly a 3% premium to what PG&E's rates are going to be. I think, investment income, that is just largely a reflection of, we do have considerable reserves. They're in the bank, and we are collecting an interest rate on that. Right now it's 1.79%. The major other sort of effect on our finances is uncollectibles. So, in a typical year, we budget 0.5% of revenue as being uncollectible. In reality, we actually experienced a lower rate than that. But one of the things that we're now forecasting with COVID is just there's going to be a significantly higher proportion of our customers who are unable to pay their bills. And eventually those balances will accrue, and some folks will never be able to catch up. And so the line item here in uncollectibles reflects an increase in that rate from 0.5% to 2.5%. That 2.5% number is not, I think, based on any specific experience we can point to. This is this is really unprecedented, the speed with which we've seen the economic downturn occur. We did look at some comparables from the financial crisis in particular, and so we felt like somewhere in the 1.5% to 4% range was what we observed from a number of California utilities. So we ended up sort of at that midpoint of 2.5%. And I'll note that those uncollectibles are dollars that we don't collect by the end of the year. It's not necessarily a full write-off. I think that's a future conversation we can have, and there's considerable regulatory work that is ongoing about how write-offs should be treated, and whether or not they should be collected from all customers or not. But this is our best guess for the time being. Next slide, please. So these are our energy expenses. What you'll see here, sort of first and foremost, is a pretty sizable reduction in our forecast cost of energy. A big chunk of this, probably 30 to 40%, is a direct result of the actions you took at our last meeting to halt the procurement of carbon-free and not compare ourselves to PG&E on the basis of carbon content, but to focus on or Bright Choice at least, to focus on renewables content. So while our overall procurement costs are increasing slightly because we're procuring more renewables, they are decreasing more because we're not buying carbon-free. So the residual, call it 60 to 65%, 60 to 70%, I guess, is a result of lower energy costs that we've been able to actually execute. So we have seen the market for electricity fall over the last 2 months, largely driven by the same economic factors that are so impacting all sectors of the economy. Well, there is the benefit that it is reducing electricity prices as well. And then we do have some unpurchased energy positions that we're working to fill as well, given the current favorable conditions, favorable pricing conditions. Now on the data management and customer service side, here, right now we pay $1.05 a meter a month. Our contract with SMUD, our current contract with SMUD ends December 2020. There are options in the contract to extend, and we're having an active dialogue with SMUD about the terms of an extension, what that might look like. We have, though, built in actually what would amount to an increase in data management costs for the second half of the fiscal year, to reflect the fact that maybe we're not able to reach the kind of agreement with SMUD that we want, and so we sort of revert to a whether it's with SMUD or even with somebody else, we have to put in a more temporary solution while we sort of work through a longer term solution. And we think that $1.20 a meter a month probably reflects what that temporary solution would cost us. So we sort of took the conservative approach here and said, if we can't get the agreement that we want to get with SMUD, then let's plan for potentially higher costs for what will likely be a short-term period, but nonetheless, it's reflected here. On our PG&E service fees, these are fees that we pay to PG&E. These are set by the Public Utilities Commission, and so the increase just reflects an increase in meters and a modest increase that is sort of in this schedule. And then finally, scheduling costs. These are the costs we pay the Northern California Power Agency to schedule our load, and that increase reflects a contracted increase we have in the agreement that we already have in place. Next slide. So here we're getting to sort of our discussion of, I would call it sort of our more discretionary costs, revenue and energy costs. In some ways that are much more uncertain because they're driven by a lot of kind of exogenous factors like weather, economic downturns that drive how much energy people use. In our last budget, you may recall that you approved 37 FTE full-time positions. As of May 2020, we have 31 of those positions filled. We have 2 interns, though those 2 interns have both been offered full-time positions. So assuming they are in the process of accepting, we have effectively 33 FTE. We currently have, on top of that, 3 positions that we're in the process of interviewing candidates for, and one additional candidate, one additional position that we're seeking to hire for in the next fiscal year. I think the bottom line here is that our proposal is to keep our headcount flat in the next fiscal year. The primary implication of that, though, is delaying our hiring of some additional customer service roles. We have in our customer service roadmap a fairly significant transition of our customer service capabilities from outside the county into the county. And so while we are still working on the options for what that might look like, outsourced, insourced, a hybrid of insourced and outsourced, our intention had been to bring some capacity in-house to support whatever path you, the board, end up directing us to take there. But because we practically speaking don't see ourselves capable of implementing a major changeover of our call center from a technology perspective, really, in this fiscal year, it could potentially start beginning of next calendar year, but we likely won't see a sort of a full switchover until the next fiscal year. We felt that it was prudent to delay the hiring of those positions until we actually have the full roadmap for customer service, really for a 3 to 5 year period. So when we think about the increase in the personnel budget from 20 to 21, I think the single most important driver here is our 20 budget was set, yes, based on 37 FTE, but it was based on a staggering of the hiring of those FTE. And so let's go to the next slide. So what you see here is through this fiscal year, you actually see sort of our run rate of budgeted personnel versus actual. And so what you see is, as we're hiring more staff, our actual climbs to the point now where, with the staffing that we have and the staffing that we're going to hire, our go forward run rate is higher than last year's budget, and that's to be expected. That's how we set our budget, but that's that's a significant driver of the increase in personnel costs. Go back to the last slide, please. Yeah. So in addition to sort of that sort of natural sort of increase in the budget, because you're going from kind of partial year to a full year cost of your 37 FTE, we have included an allowance for 2.5% average merit bonus. So we create a bonus pool of $118,000 that would be allocated to staff based on the results of their performance reviews, and would be allocated, at the high end, no more than 5%, and in the low end, likely no less than 1%. So you have sort of a 1 to 5% bell curve where that $118,000 is distributed based on performance. We have not included a cost of living adjustment here. based on some feedback we had at the Finance and Admin Committee. Instead, we're looking to enact a policy that would allow staff to monetize up to 40 hours of paid time off if they so choose. And that would be paired with a one-time grant of an additional 40 hours of PTO. So that would allow staff who choose to take the extra PTO, they can, and staff who decide that they'd rather monetize that PTO or frankly monetize outstanding PTO that they currently have, they could choose to do so. And then finally, there is a 3% sort of promotion and retention compensation category that's built in. And that's meant to reflect the fact that, there are going to be people who we want to promote this year. And, in those promotions, there are salary increases that are above and beyond the bonus. And so that's something we want to make sure. And then we want to also make sure that there's some allowance for other not yet identified retention-based adjustments that we may need to feel like we may need to make on a sort of more ad hoc basis. So next slide. Next slide. This is a slide that compares our personnel costs to probably the three most relevant other CCAs from a size perspective. So Monterey Bay, MCE, and Clean Power Alliance. Clean Power Alliance serves Ventura County and Los Angeles County. I purposely did not include the San Jose or the City of San Francisco CCAs because those two CCAs are city departments. And so their salary scales don't reflect the fact that those their employees are members of their retirement program. So I'm not sure if they're members of PERS or another program, but that's a very valuable benefit that folks typically are willing to accept slightly lower salaries for that large retirement benefit on the other side. So what I think you see here, though, is in general our positions are within $10,000 to $20,000 at most of what other CCAs pay. What I will note for our scale is that our scale does not reflect our actuals. That's the high and the low. When you look at the actuals versus the actuals at these other agencies, they also are very much in line. So I think that's just an important thing to note, that from a comp perspective, what we're setting today, what we have in place today, and what we're proposing, is in line with the market, the CCA market, generally. Next slide, please. So on the marketing expense side of things, this year's budget does reflect a fairly significant overall reduction. Some of that has to do with some of the experience we had from last year. So when you look at the budget to actuals from last year, we had a very more than adequate budget in our last fiscal year for marketing activities, and so some of this reduction does reflect that some learning and recognition that, hey, maybe we don't need as much money for things like customer mailings. But last year, we just had this discussion around sponsorships. Well, we had over $580,000 in our advertising, sponsorships, and event budget, and that is being cut to $365,000. And so that's I think a pretty significant reduction. That's all of our digital advertising. That is the recognition that we expect to be able to still do some events. Bill explanation events and the like. Data manager, that line item, and I'm sorry, the other large reduction is our community grants. Those community grants, I think, also in some ways served as sponsorships, and so that is an item that we're cutting very significantly. Our data manager expense, that line item, we have change orders or enhancements. We have change orders and enhancements to our billing system that we regularly identify. And so this is accounting for the fact that we need to pay for those that are not in our base agreement with SMUD. These noticing costs, these do not include the notifications that we will have to send for our 3 new communities. These are really the other compliance notifications that we have, things like our joint rate mailer and our power content label. And then finally, mailings. We're hoping, and we've been working with the California Public Utilities on this, to allow for some movement to electronic mailing. Many of the vast majority of the mailings that we do are compliance mailers. They're not, our ability to sort of communicate effectively or put our best foot forward with our customers. These are things in formats that are set by the Public Utilities Commission. They're very expensive to do. We're talking about millions of pieces of mail that we have to put out. And so being able to move to electronic, we think is, makes a lot of sense. And that certainly does also have a cost saving benefit. Next slide, please. So this is our legal policy and regulatory. We have, and we expect to continue, for, this fiscal year, unless, otherwise directed by the board, to continue to work with outside general counsel. So that, is where, while we save on personnel costs, we incur costs in our legal, incremental costs in our legal budget. And, the thing about legal budget is it's one of those things, it generally goes one direction, that's up, because you can't just say, well, I'm gonna do less legal work. I'm gonna negotiate fewer power purchase contracts, or I'm gonna review fewer contracts with outside parties. That work is pretty steady, and unless Inder's willing to give us a break on her rate, usually legal rates go up, not down, year over year. Our legislative consultant, that is our lobbyist, and these are I think continue to be given all the things that are happening in Sacramento, having that those eyes and ears and the ability to advocate for ourselves effectively in Sacramento continues to be something that's really important. As we have added staff in the regulatory department, we have, we do believe we have some ability to cut down on some reliance on technical consultants. One thing I'll just note though overall here is, EBCE, I think, is first among its peers, the CCA peers, in our commitment to our policy and regulatory engagement. I think at one of our last meetings, Supervisor Haggerty was asking us about the PCIA, and why can't we get better outcomes at the PCIA? And one of the things I noted was EBCE, we have 2 dedicated full-time staff working just on PCIA. I don't think any other CCA has 1 full-time staff person working on the PCIA. And we do that because it has such a outsized impact on our finances, but on all CCA finances. And so as the largest CCA in Northern California, we want to make sure that we're very active in particularly the regulatory arena, trying to shape the rules to support our goals. You'll note here that we have cut our sponsorships to 0. Again, I think that's a reflection of the fact that we need to find cost reductions, and sponsorships are an easy one. Though sometimes tough, because these are events that I think are one good. The Berkeley Power Conference being a great example. It's a great way to engage with up and coming potential staff. It's also a great way to engage with thought leaders who are potentially going to be setting policy. Next slide, please. This other professional search, this is really where we capture sort of all non-legal and non-regulatory consulting. That it's accounting, it's HR, it's IT, it's technical consulting for things like energy procurement. It's working with our vendor who's developing our integrated resource plan and is doing the very complex energy market modeling there. The primary driver of the increase in cost here relative to last year is starting to put an investment in a customer relationship management system. So we currently do not have the system of record for our billing. And I think we've done a lot of road mapping, a lot of work on what does the future of our customer service function look like, certainly including how do we bring more of that into Alameda County. And I think one of the things that we've come to realize is we need to own the customer relationship management system, the system of record for all customer transactions, opt-ups, opt-downs, billing inquiries, all of the customer billing data. It all has to sit on a system that we own. And so that, is going to take some time to build. And so we have both a full-time staff person and $350,000 in implementation costs set in this budget to initiate the process of building that customer relationship management system. And one of the reasons I tied that to the call center is if you're going to have in-house call center reps, they need to be working on your customer relationship management system. Otherwise, having your staff working on someone else's CRM creates a challenge, particularly if you ever want to migrate from one vendor to another. Does that mean that you have to go and fully retrain your staff on potentially a totally different technology platform that could create some pretty significant personnel challenges, but also customer experience challenges. Next slide, please. And then finally, I think this is our final kind of high level category for overhead is G&A. We see some increase in our small equipment, driven by growth in staff, and just more staff, more use of different software platforms, and working to sort of bring certain things, less reliance on technical consultants means more use of software ourselves. A great example is in energy procurement. Our staff has been working, we've brought on some pretty strong technical analysts who are now licensing software that we were previously hiring consultants to use for us. And so with the consultant, you're paying not only for the license, but you're also paying, pretty high rate for their time. And so we're bringing some of that in-house. So yeah, there's a cost increase, but it's an overall cost. We believe it's an overall cost savings in the long run. A big driver of these costs are, our ongoing dues to Cal CCA. I think, while that's a big dollar ticket, Cal CCA really is where we are most effective in our regulatory and legislative advocacy. It's hard to make an argument for a big change to a bill in the legislature, or a big change to a decision of the Public Utilities Commission when you're a single CCA, but when you can be the voice of 19 CCAs serving 10 million Californians, you have a lot more voice. In the operational expense area, one of the things that we are expecting this year that we think could be a driver of our inability to reduce these costs is the fact that we are pursuing what is called a prepay arrangement, and it's a structure where we can leverage our tax exempt status to derive potentially several $1 million a year of energy cost savings through a structured financial product. And we're working on this with a number of other CCAs, but there are legal setup costs to do this that we have to incur this fiscal year, but they're going to have 10, 20, 30x types of return, or really frankly more than that. We're talking about multiple millions of dollars of savings a year, but very, very significant returns on what amounts to a pretty small upfront cost. We do have an office lease. We do have, I believe, 2.5 years left on our lease. And that's the major driver here. I think in this whole work from home world, certainly our office strategy is something that is going to have to evolve. And with that evolution, we want to think about how do we create some cost savings. So I'll say that it's definitely on my mind. Are there ways that we can renegotiate or review our current lease to reduce our costs? But assuming that doesn't happen, these are costs that we're expecting. And, in this line item, well, $81,000 for conferences and professional development. Well, one, yes, we may not expect a lot of travel for the coming months, but, we do expect there to continue to be, really considerable sort of professional development opportunities we want our staff to pursue. Whether that's paying for bar dues and necessary bar trainings that some of the lawyers on our staff have to pursue, or it's technical development courses for some of our energy procurement staff who are being trained on some pretty complex stuff. We feel like retaining some of that in the budget continues to be pretty important. Next is local development, and so I'm actually going to switch over to JP. JP, why don't you walk us through the proposed local development budget?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Happy to do that. So in our local development budget this year, we are largely remaining flat from last year. So despite the potential for loss in margin, still really wanting to invest heavily in our local development efforts. So I'll run quickly through this overview slide, and then there's some following slides for each of the program areas. So this coming year with our budget, the table here shows some of the program areas, which are pretty consistent from the local development business plan. In demand response, we plan to spend some money, mostly coincident with our building electrification work, to work on kind of the beneficial electrification in buildings, and as buildings electrify, and many buildings tend to peak in the afternoon, evening, when electricity is most expensive and has the highest carbon content. We want to make sure that we put some demand response activities in place, and one of the areas there, one of the technologies that we can look to shift is hot water heaters and heat pump hot water heaters, which is one of the programs that we will be building on in our building electrification category. We also plan on investing in energy efficiency, so that's something that we definitely want to invest in, and also work to leverage some public dollars. Building electrification is something we're going to be ramping up for the revenue load growth, as well as the degasification and getting natural gas combustion out of our buildings. Vehicle electrification is a pretty big budget, as noted, because of the opportunity to leverage the California Energy Commission. So, of note, it is a large proportion of this year's budget at 70%. That doesn't have to always be 70% going forward. It is this year, considering it's going to be a pretty tight year, but certainly open to other investments in local development that are larger budgets, should kind of margins loosen up and we have more money to spend on local development, then you can be sure that we'll be asking for it. And then collaborative procurement is going to market and building solar and storage and other activities that we plan to do behind the meter. So overall, the budget's about $6.5 million. As noted prior, and we will continue to note, there is staffing and local development hires that we have. So the staffing budget does not come specifically from the local development budget. It's an HR cost, but it has been requested to be shown here. So we are showing our staffing, and we plan to add a fellow this year in addition to the 4 people that we currently have. So we're not planning on adding any additional full-time resources this year to the team, but do want some help to help implement programs. So I've allocated some funding for that. And then lastly, as we think about kind of leveraging funding and bringing in external sources of money, the CEC's EVIP program, which you thankfully just passed, will bring in dollars. And as Jesse reminded me, in this coming year, because the CEC's money all comes in the first year, I had kind of matched this $4 million to our $4 million investment. But that's actually much less than it will be, because the CEC is going to deliver all of their funding in the first year. There's much more kind of direct leveraged funding that'll be coming into the county in 2021, which is quite exciting. We actually just got a note today from the California Energy Commission showing that current EVIP incentives are covering about 57% of the cost of electric vehicle charging infrastructure that's going in through the program right now. So that means that the other 47% is being covered by the project developers and the site owners and the people who are installing this charging infrastructure. So what that really means is that when we put in 75 cents and the California Energy Commission puts in 75 cents, there's another, or 75%, or sorry, 57%, there's another 47% coming from private sector. So the indirect leveraging of this California electric vehicle incentive program is going to be very substantial, almost 2 to 1 on the dollars that we put in and the dollars that the CEC puts in. So, you know, in light of COVID and the need to, you know, create jobs, we're really happy to be putting a program in place that that will add significantly to jobs in Alameda County. So if we go to the next slide, please. So, you know, as noted, we continue to follow the local development business plan, and as we're bringing programs forward, you know, we'll certainly continue to update the board and the CAC and work with the community to shape these programs. As noted, you know, really happy to be leveraging external funding. We are also going to be receiving some EPA funding, which will be going to evaluating some brownfields in Alameda County for the potential transition of brownfields over to EV charging stations. So continuing our pursuit of those external dollars. Next slide, please. So if we go into the program areas, we have the two top line items, which we've just discussed. So I'll skip over those two. As part of the electric vehicle incentive program, we want to be investing in kind of helping to develop some target locations for electric vehicle infrastructure. You know, we have spent a considerable amount of time with the CEC to get them to approve us allocating funding for multifamily housing and those customers who live in and rent in our disadvantaged communities and multifamily housing developments. So we're allocating some money for, you know, developing and focusing our outreach efforts on those areas. And we are also providing fleet electrification technical support. We have already multiple cities participating in that technical support, and next year we want to carry that on because we have other cities who have indicated their desire to receive that technical support, and so we want to broaden that offer out next year. And as well, you know, certainly focusing on medium and heavy duty fleet electrification is a priority as well, with all the transit and goods movement that happens in and through Alameda County. And so that is another area for us to be focusing on next year. Next slide. So with building electrification, there is, this is something that we are increasing from last year. We already have or are planning on launching a heat pump hot water incentive for heaters, for electrifying natural gas heaters this year, and we want to carry that on into next year. We also have had very good success with our REACH code program. We have 8 cities now that are planning on taking REACH codes or have taken REACH codes to council. And so we are going to continue to support the implementation of those REACH codes into next year. We are planning on putting in place a commercial induction grant program. This was actually a program we had scheduled to do this year, but because of COVID and the impact to restaurants, we actually put that money into the COVID relief fund along with some other dollars. So therefore are planning to release that program next year once restaurants start operating again, and there will certainly be a large focus on making sure that that those grants to electrify kitchens are widely available across all our restaurant types and communities. Something we want to make sure is widely available to our customers to see the value of induction. And then there's some support that we definitely need to put into just raising awareness around the benefits of electrification, not only the ease and benefit of not burning natural gas in homes and businesses, and making people aware that there are electric alternatives and the benefits of electric homes and businesses, something we need to be getting out there with. And then demand response, as noted, a lot of these electrical loads will be coming on in times where we might not want them to come online, even though we do want to electrify. And so flexible load and targeting this load growth so that we can make sure it doesn't impact, our carbon emissions or margins is something that that we'll be investing in. Next slide. So energy efficiency and our collaborative procurement activities. So with our collaborative procurement, that's really working with our communities for delivering behind the meter solutions and leveraging our purchasing power. So we have our solar and storage resilience program, which we are planning to launch soon. We're really in final negotiation stages with our two vendors and planning on bringing that news to you next month at the board meeting. We also are working on a program on reducing customer disconnections. Although customer disconnections have been halted because of COVID, we have some of the zip codes highest disconnection rates in the state in some of our zip codes. And so we want to be focusing on helping those customers who are getting disconnected for lack of ability to pay their bills. And we want to make sure that we help those customers who are being disconnected because of lack of ability to pay. And then last couple things on collaborative procurement. There's a huge opportunity for us to assist our municipal partners and businesses in electrification and behind the meter solar and storage renewables, as well as vehicle electrification. So we're exploring how we can kind of develop and own some of those assets in order to ease that process, as well as create opportunities for EBCE to participate in that ownership structure. So that's something that we'll be investing in, as well as helping our cities really electrify in an aggressive manner across building and vehicle and solar and storage. So quite a lot on the collaborative procurement side with EBCE participating in developing these new resources and assets that can help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and lower operating costs for all of our customers. And then the last section is energy efficiency. So energy efficiency was not something that was allocated a large budget in the original local development business plan, but we are investing more in energy efficiency. We're planning on issuing some pay for performance procurement solicitations this year coming up is something we want to do, and we'd like to follow on with that next year as well. And this is really a good way to help our customers reduce their electricity and natural gas bills, which is extremely important in light of COVID. And it gives us a foundation for applying to the California Public Utilities Commission for public dollars to develop and implement energy efficiency programs. So public funding is collected by the Utilities Commission, and right now given to PG&E to administer energy efficiency programs. And so we think that that's something that we may very well want to do. So we're building a strategy around that. And it will be a way to bolster our energy efficiency program portfolio And so we've put some technical and legal consultant funding in for pursuit of those dollars. And the pay for performance solicitations that we plan to do this year and into next will really help us build a foundation for a strong application to the Public Utilities Commission that'll really be data driven, so that we can pursue that path should that be something that really makes sense for us. So I think that's my last slide. Stephanie, is that right? Yeah. So thanks very much for your time.
Okay. So from the very exciting world of local development to interest expense. I'm just trying to find, okay, so interest. So, our interest expense here is really driven by, largely by our undrawn fees. If you recall, in December, we upsized our credit facility from 50 to 80 million, with 60 million we're able to draw in cash and 35 million that we're able, up to 35 million that we're able to use for letters of credit. There is a 1% undrawn fee. So, 600 of that 804,000 is a fee that we have to have access to that 60 million in capital. And the rest is really a reflection of the cost of our letters of credit. Letters of credit at 1.75% are an extremely cost-effective use of funds. Not only do they, I think our ICS account actually comes in at 1.79. So even from a pure interest arbitrage standpoint, we're making that extra 0.04%, but mostly it's good to be able to keep your cash unrestricted for other uses and use these LCs to post when we enter into, say, energy transactions that require them. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I referred to at the beginning, we are really at this point still looking at our new community integration as a scenario, given the uncertainties around the exact timing. For the purposes of this presentation, though, we are assuming an April integration. The reason we chose April is that April is really financially probably the most advantageous time to bring a new community on. You have the confluence of higher spring and summer, your higher spring and then really moving into summer rates. So you have higher relative revenue at that time of year, coupled with low energy costs. April and May tend to be very low energy cost periods. You have wind and solar generating at zero marginal cost, and you don't yet have a lot of the air conditioning load driving up consumption. And so that's the driver for April as sort of the preferred timeline to integrate the new communities. We also did not apply full cost to the new communities. What we did is we looked really at what are the variable costs associated with bringing Newark, Pleasanton, and Tracy on. Those are largely marketing and outreach costs and data management and customer service costs. We've largely incurred, say, like legal costs. We've largely incurred many of the legal costs, really all of the legal costs associated with bringing the communities on, modifications to the JPA, bringing our new board members on. And so at this point, really it's just a matter of picking a date and starting to do the outreach and communications and marketing associated with that integration. So all in all, we are forecasting and this is a good thing, a positive contribution margin for the first 3 months from our new communities of $3.5 million. And while that you would look at that margin, you say, wow, $3.5 million on 13.5 million in sales. That is that's 40%. Well, it's not really a 40% margin. I think some of this does reflect the fact of the good timing of bringing the communities in at that time. It creates the opportunity to generate some margin that we would not necessarily be able to generate if we brought them in, say, in January. And then, going forward in 21 and the following fiscal year, one of our challenges really in general around longer term budget forecasting is all of the uncertainties around PG&E's rates and the PCIA. So when we bring our recommendation for the timeline of these 3 new communities, we will be looking at a full calendar year margin effect for Pleasanton, Newark, and Tracy, with some assumptions around what we think will happen to the PCIA and PG&E's rates. So you will be able to look at sort of a longer term view of the effect of these new communities on agency finances. But, we think from a budget standpoint and really from a, overall standpoint, it really is a positive thing financially and certainly from a community perspective to bring Newark, Pleasanton, and Tracy into the mix. Next slide, please. I'm going to actually skip over this one quickly. This is our reserve policy. We are, expecting to make our next contribution to our reserves in November after our audit. So we'll just jump past this one given that it's almost 9:30. Just quickly comparing ourselves to other CCAs, what you will see is that, our expenses, our overhead expenses are just a tick below what we find in our comparable set of other CCAs. I think, that's just a reflection that we try to run a pretty tight ship. Next slide, please. And, similarly, you can see where we're spending money, employment, total overhead, those things are, at or below the comparable set. You will note that energy programs is at parity. One of the questions that came from the CAC about, well, why you would think EVC would be spending on a percentage basis more than other CCAs on energy programs, which is really local development. And I think to that, yes, we have all other things being equal, a fairly modest local development budget, in that $6 million range, but that really doesn't capture all of the local investments that EVC is catalyzing. You think that about the almost 40 or over 40 megawatts of energy storage that is being built as part of the Oakland Clean Energy Initiative. That's, that's tens of millions of dollars of investment that's being made in Alameda County over the course of the next year to build that energy storage. You think about the 57.5 megawatts of wind that we've contracted for in Alameda County. That's tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, probably in overall capital cost, maybe low tens or high tens, low hundreds of millions of dollars. Many jobs being created, and other procurements that we're making akin to that. And so I think that's not always captured in the 6 million. It's in actual fact, I think a much bigger impact. So I think that's just worth noting when we compare ourselves to other CCAs. And most other CCAs just don't have the ability to make those very large local investments because they don't have the resources that we have. Next slide, please. So quickly comparing ourselves from a value proposition perspective. I think what you see here at our 1% proposed discount, we're very much in line with MCE and Silicon Valley and San Jose Clean Energy. MCE has a range of effectively, just above 0% discount to a little about 2%, depending on where the customers live. San Jose has a 1%. Sonoma Clean Power actually has raised their rates to 2 to 4% above PG&E's. I think those are all just reflections of the fact that margins are tight, but due to the PCIA. In the case of you do have Silicon Valley and Peninsula, who are still offering higher discounts. My understanding, though, is in the next 6 months, as they sort of reevaluate their value propositions, they will be looking to narrow their discounts as well. So some of those higher discounts are just a reflection of their boards aren't taking action later in the year. I think the overall trend is narrowing of the discount, though. Next slide, please. So, I think all in all, when we think about sort of the initial staff recommendation, and this is really the base case, it's one where we shift things a little bit from the current state to kind of put ourselves in a position to achieve that balanced budget. And so that is that 0.5% reduction in our discount. That is the increase in the Brilliant 100 premium. No change to the Renewable 100. That's largely due to the fact that we think that 1 cent a kilowatt hour is largely reflective of the cost of service for that product. And if we were to significantly say increase that, one, there's not many customers on it, and two, they have the ability to opt out. And so, if it's for an economic rationale and customers opt out, you lose that economic benefit. Even with this modest reduction in our discount, we do still expect to deliver over $5 million of customer bill savings next year. Next slide, please. So here, I want to talk about some just ongoing additional risks and mitigation. So, we're presenting a base case. Things could always be worse. There are some, some things that could drive them to be better as well. One of the things that I think it's worth really noting here is, we do not explicitly include the potential kind of overall reductions in energy consumption that we're currently seeing from COVID. So, next slide, please. For the month of April, we saw a roughly 6% reduction in consumption and a 10 to 15% reduction in the peak usage. The challenge is it's hard to extrapolate that for the rest of the year. We certainly think there may be some, and it's consistent with, past economic recessions that you see reductions in consumption. But this is sort of an unprecedented recession, especially from an energy consumption, because so many businesses just close so quickly. How many of them will reopen, and will consumption actually rise because so many people are at home using air conditioning? I think they're in Texas, actually, just last week in Austin, they actually saw an increase. They had a heat wave, and they actually saw an increase in energy consumption relative to what they would expect, because so many people are at home running air conditioning, and those air conditioners are really inefficient. So there's certainly a scenario where we actually see more consumption, at least in the in the near term. But I think the reason I'm presenting these as kind of our different scenarios is because there's so much uncertainty, and that uncertainty could result in lower revenues, and those lower revenues may not be offset by lower costs. I think at the moment, that's sort of our operating assumption, is that yes, we may see 5%, 6% reduction in consumption, but because it's paired with a 10 to 15% reduction in peak energy is the most expensive energy. So if you're having to buy less of that, your overall costs may be lower than your reduction in revenue. And so we're sort of, based on our initial findings, we think that those two will largely offset each other. So from a margin standpoint, we're not expecting in this base case an effect on margin. And so we didn't reflect a major change in our base case budget. But nonetheless, these are things that we're continuing to monitor. And the volatility is something that I think does support the idea of being quite conservative in our expenses, and trying to maintain, I think, what we think is a pretty conservative view of how to move forward with things like the discount and with the power content that we've set for ourselves. Now, I think that all being said, we are seeing a I'm sorry, I was looking at the slide already, so I've actually walked through kind of my talk on this, so I'm just going to skip this slide too. The next slide, please. Thank you. Beyond the load impacts that are largely driven by COVID, there's energy market risk. We have about $80 million currently of market exposure. That can swing 10, 20% either way over the next 12 months. Largely driven by things like weather, but it's also driven by global economic factors that are driving down things like the price of natural gas. Certainly with COVID, there's just more uncertainty. It's just hard to forecast what's going to happen. And so, knowing how that will swing that 10 or 20% is really hard to assume. One of the things that you would typically do, though, is you would hedge yourself. So you wouldn't have that $80 million of exposure to the market. You try to take that down considerably. The challenge being over hedging creates exposure to load reduction. So part of the reason why we're able to accept 5, 6, 7% reduction in load is we haven't bought that energy yet. And so because we don't have to go and buy it, we just avoid those costs. And that's what sort of gives us that sense of, kind of general indifference to the reduction in consumption. If we were to have gone and bought that already, then we're just hoping that the price we bought it at is lower than the market price at the time, we'll have to sell it. And so that's an argument against over hedging, is that you can end up taking some financial risk if your hedge positions are greater than your physical energy consumption. Next slide, please. We talked a little bit about this, so I won't go into it much more, but this uncollectibles challenge we face is really uncertain. So 2.5%, is that the right number? Unclear. Could it be higher? Yeah. And so it is something that we're monitoring closely. It is one of the reasons why we're pursuing this CARE program, is trying to encourage people to sign up for a program that will help better manage their energy costs, and hopefully that will help some customers avoid racking up big balances and eventually leading to uncollectibles. Next slide, please. Opt-out risk, I don't think we're expecting any sort of specific opt-out risk. This fiscal year, we're continuing to offer a discount to PG&E. We're offering more renewable energy than PG&E. I think PG&E, their perception and sort of customer relationship challenges are well understood. But obviously, customer opt-outs are always a risk. We're not currently expecting significant DA expansion in the near term, so we don't view that as a risk factor. That's largely just because of COVID. Things like direct access have been kind of, like many policies that are not COVID related, have been sort of moved to the sideline. Next slide, please. Regulatory risk, the first year one is the PCIA. The PCIA could always be worse. And in our current forecast, we are assuming that we are deferring $16 million in PCIA costs. The CPUC could say, no, you actually have to pay for that as an even higher PCIA this year. We think that's a fairly low likelihood, but it's always possible. Another regulatory risk that we're sort of increasingly facing is power content reporting. So until very recently, the California Energy Commission had one set of rules for how you report your power content, and they've just recently changed them. The challenge is they're now applying those changes retroactively. So, there are energy purchases that we've entered into prior to the rules being clear, and the CEC is coming out and saying now, those are you have to report them differently. And so from, the one example being the use of PCC3 RECs, we do have a very small amount of PCC RECs in our portfolio, subject to, the limits of our Joint Powers Authority. And the new power content label is not going to treat them as renewable from a power content perspective. While they previously were treated as renewable. And so, do you now have to go and buy more renewables to hit the same level of renewable power content, even though you bought something under a different set of rules. Similarly with ACS, we have some legacy ACS that we purchased before we decided to stop buying large hydro, incremental large hydro. And some of the reporting requirements there are changing as well. One of them being, ACS has historically been unspecified. We've procured it as an unspecified resource, but there is a very small amount of nuclear that is in the system mix in the Pacific Northwest. That is now required to be reported. Now, we've taken a very strong position that we don't want nuclear in our mix. Do we need to go and liquidate those ACS positions potentially at a loss because of these new requirements? So, those are risk factors. We're continuing to try to push for a treatment where transactions that were entered into before the rules were approved should be grandfathered and treated under the old rules, which is, either as renewable or unspecified. But that's an ongoing risk factor. And then finally, the working group 3, this is the future allocation. This is going to have a big effect on our costs, because if we get an allocation of PG&E's renewables, it might reduce our overall renewables procurement costs. But if we don't get it, or if it goes the wrong way, it could end up spiking the PCIA. And this is, again, something we're monitoring closely, but is an ongoing risk factor. Next slide, please. We're almost done. 2 more slides. So what are the tools that we have available to us to further manage our costs? We can further reduce our discount. We're proposing reduce it from 1.5 to 1. You could reduce it from 1.5 to 0.5% or to 0%. And those would increase revenues. 2.7 all the way up to 4.5. We could further increase Brilliant 100, the premium, to say 4%, though, again, I think at 3%, we are really reflecting our cost of service. And, I'll just note, this is probably a bullet we should not refer to much going forward in this presentation, because there's also the likelihood that customers would opt out at a premium. So I don't want to overstate the cost savings or the increased revenue rather of Brilliant 100. I think in some ways it's more of a cost saving measure at this point. We do have some excess large hydro that we have purchased prior to the board changing our power procurement strategy for the year. There may be an opportunity to monetize that. And then finally, we are currently, we have had some conversations and are currently assessing to what degree might other CCAs or other entities in the market be interested in buying PG&E's nuclear allocation from us. So this would be a scenario where we would enter into a contract where we would not take it, but we would essentially accept and then resell to this other entity at for some financial benefit. And it would not show up on our power content. It would not serve our customers, but an entity that wants it would be able to monetize that. I think, again, that's a fair potentially up to $2 million of demand, but that's fairly uncertain and would require incremental board action. Under the current direction, we would not be able to do that. So finally, last slide. What are our alternative budget scenarios? So, I think alternative 1 is we maintain our discount at 1.5%, and we find incremental savings elsewhere. And the primary area we can generate that level of savings, 2.7 million, would be a reduction in the local development budget. Another alternative would be we keep the we increase our local development spend from 6.5 to 7, 8, a little over $9 million, but we further reduce our discount. And then I think a third alternative would be to reduce the discount even further from, say, 1.5 to 0.5%, and realize an additional $2.7 million in increased margin that helps to buffer ourselves against all those risk factors that I mentioned. So with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Appreciate it. Sorry for everybody that we ran very late tonight. But I do want to give people an opportunity to ask questions. And I believe we may have some public speakers, which of course we absolutely need to listen to. So for those of you who are still here from the public, raise your hand if you haven't already. And Madam Clerk, you could call the public speakers in order. Thank you.
Would you like them to still have 2 minutes or 3?
2 minutes, please.
2 minutes, thank you. Blair Beekman is signed up to speak, and so is Aleda Dupree. So Blair Beekman, you are unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. This was a really great lecture tonight. Thank you. To try to elaborate on a few of my words from the previous item, I'm being locked into a few things this June. I hope we can make important new efforts to look for more genuine, positive, sustainable energy practices, infrastructure building, and allocation process that is more true to the spirit of the term local community energy by next June and into the next few years. Thank you for your words of electric cars and affordable housing. Pre-COVID-19, I felt the Bay Area was trying to work towards the ideas of mixed income in housing that can be open, familiar, comforting in how to work towards better ideas of equity, EBCE good practices, and good Bay Area government practices overall. I think it can be a good way to return and continue to our good practices in the SF Bay Area. To offer again, East Bay local community energy has been given the SF Bay Area and the country for decades now good steady models and examples. I hope we can all go through an important personal inventory process with the nuclear hydroelectric deal this past month and what can be better ideals and practices, and how to bring important definitions to the term positive sustainability for both local energy and as a collective society. To conclude, I think there's a plan by 2023 to 25 that I think can very much speak to our better ideals of local community energy that EBCE can work towards. Thanks again for a really great lecture tonight, and it'll be really nice just to be learning things from yourselves in these coming months. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker.
Aleda, you are unmuted.
Thank you, Chair Cal. Aleda Dupree for the record. As I've heard in previous presentations, there's some good elements here. It's important that we preserve the investment aspects of our budget. I'm in support of the building electrification, restaurant electrification, heating. I do these things myself. I have induction in my home. My home is all electric. And transport electrification we talked about before. And a time of use is very important because we want to orient our purchase of electricity toward the times when it's most available and when it's cleanest. So that way we don't have the curtailment of solar and wind that's been happening lately. So we have to keep going with that. As far as this potential of the purchasing of a nuclear allocation and reselling it, I'd say I'm in the neutral on it. It's worth a study. If we can do that without compromising the power content label or our brand, I would support it. And I believe that it can be done in that way, and we're just selling something that we have. So let's continue to work on our awareness and investing in our customer relations. The idea of us building customer management systems will indeed help. I mean, after all, public power is about developing relationships with customers, and that people will know that when they deal with EBCE, there is indeed a face to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I believe those are all our public speakers. So back to the panel. Again, colleagues, I realize it's late in the evening, much later than we thought it would be, and we are not taking any vote tonight. However, if there are things one wants to lay on the table, get a reaction and share with staff, now could be one of the times to do that. So I'm looking for hands raised. I see one so far. Councilmember Hernandez from San Leandro.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I know it's late, but Nick and staff, thank you very much for taking the feedback from the Finance Subcommittee, throwing in the actuals for 1920 so we can compare what we look like. It's good to see that you have reduced the overall increase that we're looking at from 9.5 to 5.5 for the increase of SG&A. Like to learn more about the cost of the 40 hours, the sellback, maybe at the next discussion. For me, professional development, I think it's important for staff. I know there won't be a lot of traveling, but I think that's still important. In regards to the hires, I think I knew that you had 2 fellows. If you are transitioning the CRM, it's going to be important to have somebody who understands it. And if you're bringing on an HR manager, I saw you didn't have the cut. You had to cut to the HR consulting budget for $25,000, but it just depends on the value of bringing, maintaining that consulting relationship or bringing somebody full time. So there's additional costs, right? And then understanding the power contracts manager that you're bringing on, is that something that maybe Howard still can manage or not? Don't have to answer it here, but just something to think about, right? So managing our costs and the office strategy, really understanding what can you do with the landlord there. Can they maybe give you some concessions, abate some rent, delay it? I manage another portfolio of offices, and in that location, they ask for concessions. Even Starbucks is saying, can we not pay rent for a year? So it's not that extreme, but just, looking at options of maybe seeing if they can reduce some of that cost. I know you just moved in, so it'd be a little tricky. But overall, good job, very detailed. Really enjoyed the opportunity to sit with you early in this week with Chair Kalb and Director Mendel. Good stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Monroe from Livermore.
Very brief. This is amazing, an amazing presentation, enormous amount of work. Both last month's meeting and this meeting, this budget, this moving forward speaks to care, both for the future as well as to values. And I just want to say thank you very much.
Okay. I see any more hands raised? I do not see any more hands raised. So for now, obviously anybody is welcome to send their individual comments to Nick. We can't share them all privately outside of public meetings, but you can certainly send them to Nick and he will compile them or certainly read them and consider them. Nick, the process from this point forward, are we going to have a discussion at the executive committee this week about the budget as well? You're muted.
We have it agendized. I think the idea, I will not run through the presentation again, but rather it's an opportunity to provide additional commentary on the budget, given that you've now received the presentation. And then over the course of the next weeks, we will have a series of public workshops, Zoom workshops, where we will walk through at a high level the budget, but really mostly focused on the value proposition, and kind of get it and give people an opportunity to provide written comment on their view of whether what to do with the value proposition in conformance with our rate setting requirements.
Right. Okay. And all the notification of those Zoominars or whatever they might be, you will make sure all the board members are informed about those.
Yes.
Okay, and then any board member, as long as it's less than half of us or less than half of any committee, any board member can join in and listen, obviously. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised. So I'm going to close this agenda item. Obviously it's late, but this is obviously one of the most important things we do each year, as everybody here knows, of course. And so please look over the materials between now and the next board meeting later in June. Don't be afraid to ask your questions of Nick and send him comments. And let's move on to our next agenda item, which I think is just announcements. What is the next agenda item?
That's it. That's the last agenda item. Staff
Okay.
announcements.
Staff. So are there any, does any board member or staff have any related announcements here? I'm seeing none. Okay. All right. I'm going to call this meeting adjourned. Thank you so much. Sorry for the late time. Everybody, please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.